Glory America, bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio inside of the Beltway on Wednesday, June 17th in the year of the plague, 2020. Good morning to you. There's lots to cover today. There is shooting on the India-China border. By the end of the day, there might be a war. I will come back to that. I've got a guest in the studio this morning, John Schroeder. He is here inside the Beltway on a Butler University recruiting trip. They're looking for 5'9" guards who can't shoot in the second half. As any of you know, the Butler Bearcats or the Butler Bulldogs, whatever their name is, they usually go to the NC2A tournament. This year, they didn't go, and so they're trying to really re-up their number of people on their bench. And so those 5'9" ace shooters who clank it off the rim, that's who they really need. So John is welcome in the studio this morning. Let me do the rundown for you. He's shaking his head. I just report the news. In this hour, it's called The Rundown. I just report the news. India-China border standoff turns violent with 20 Indian soldiers dead. India said 20 of its soldiers died in a clash with Chinese troops with two-country disputed border in the Himalayan mountains. That's tough fighting terrain to begin with, but there's not normally a lot of dead soldiers when they move around. They've been having actual fist fights on the border as the means of resolving this. The New York Times headline is worst clash in decades on disputed India-China border. You know, China has had a resurgence of coronavirus in Beijing. Totalitarian regimes like China's look to divert the attention of their people when there is a domestic crisis. So do not be surprised if we have one of China's famous short, sharp wars, as they've waged in Tibet, with India, with Vietnam, the shelling of Taiwan way back in the 50s. The invasion of Korea was not short and sharp, but they are not hesitant to use force, and the mask has slipped from the CCP. There's a Hugh Hewitt column in the Washington Post. It's on the front page of the Washington Post today. The fourth rescue bill needs to repair damage done to the economy and national security is the headline the Post gave it. And I want you to hear it first thing, because I want you to send it to your friends, especially in light of the fact that we've got a very tense situation in India and China. Two nuclear powers, by the way, neither of which I think would hesitate to use them if they thought it was necessary for their national advantage. President Trump, I write, was effectively denied a first term by a small band of senior law enforcement personnel, and perhaps some in the intelligence community, who from the start wanted him hamstrung or worse. His accomplishments on the judiciary, the military rebuild, and the deregulation make his accomplishments even more remarkable in light of this attempt at a coup. Our economic recovery is needed again. The first one was done by January, the blue-collar boom, and then the Chinese Communist Party allowed the virus to escape from China and crippled the world economy. So the president who did it once should be the one to do it again, not return to the Biden-Obama entropy. Public confidence, I write, in the president should grow because for the first time in his tenure, there is growing alignment on priorities among the big five. Vice President Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Attorney General William Barr, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Pence, Pompeo, and Barr are principals, of course. Meadows and O'Brien are staff. But if those two staffers aren't on the same page, the gears grind in the West Wing, and the president's vision cannot be implemented. It is now an article of faith within the West Wing that not since then Chief of Staff James Baker and then National Security Advisor William Clark worked together in Ronald Reagan's first term have these two officials been in such harmony with the principals and with each other. My reporting tells me the West Wing believes $40 billion is needed in COVID-19 related defense spending. Now, I don't know what Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense, thinks, and I don't know what the Chiefs of Staff think. But the Pentagon needs to get on board with this and push the measures everyone else, including the Commander-in-Chief, President Trump, have rallied around. The Pentagon has slow-rolled the president on the naval buildup he wants. There is still, 40 months into the presidency, no plan for the 355-ship Navy that Trump campaigned on. 40 months, no plan. The West Wing now wants additional spending for defense, both to respond to the needs that have arisen from the pandemic and to match the nation from whence the virus came, the People's Republic of China. They want $12 billion to cover overruns in defense production caused directly by the virus. They need $6 billion for the defense industrial base where there are single-source suppliers to make sure they're not bought by or meddled by the Chinese. They need a dozen F-35B for the Marine Corps. They need a dozen F-35As for the Air Force. They need another Virginia-class attack submarine, which is the instrument of power of choice in the South China Sea. Some say two. I'll settle for one. They need an array of Coast Guard ships. And people, when I sent the column over to the Post, an editor said to me, Coast Guard ships, those are for the United States. I said, no, they're for the littoral first chain islands in the Pacific. People don't understand that. All of these platforms will eventually deploy to parts of the Pacific to confront China, which is attempting to dominate not just India at this day, but the South China Sea every day. I asked Tom Cotton on yesterday's program whether my sources were good. He said, I would say you're very well sourced indeed. I even know that the White House wants to extend the sea lives of the Ticonderoga-class cruisers and the Oliver Hazard Perry frigates, which are in the Philadelphia shipyard and not at sea. Alignment is a hot new phrase. People in Cleveland know what alignment means. That means where your owner, your general manager, your head coach, and everybody else in the organization shares one vision. They agree to one set of principles. Alignment has never, ever happened on this show because I don't have a producer. But if I had a producer, we'd have alignment on this show. There is finally alignment in the White House between the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the national security advisor, and the chief of staff. And that's because they finally cleared away the Russia hoax. They've finally gotten out of impeachment, and they are dealing with unprecedented crises all at once. Whenever Congress gets around to appropriating the next huge chunk of funds to cope with the pandemic, I conclude my column with, and its aftershocks, likely before Labor Day, we will learn whether that alignment holds, and the president can make sure that the fourth rescue bill seeks to repair damage done to national security. That's over at the Washington Post. I hope you send it everywhere, especially to Congress, because there are some Republicans who don't want to add to the deficit. $40 billion is nothing compared to the $4 trillion we're spending. 1%, right? 1% of the money that we're spending should go to national defense. It used to be 4 to 5% of every bill ought to go to national defense. 1%. But there are some knuckleheads in the Democratic Party who do not want to spend. They'll spend trillions of dollars for relief and not a penny for defense. It's remarkable. The good news yesterday, U.S. retail sales rose 18% in May. We were expecting at this hour yesterday a 7% hike in retail sales. So let me check the markets. Brought to you by Birch Gold. You should diversify. The market dropped 1,700 points in one day last week. It doesn't bother anyone with a diversified portfolio. You diversify by going to hughgold.com or by sending my name, Hugh, to 474747, texting Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747, or going to hughgold.com. Gold this morning is at 1721. That is higher than the 1400 when I first recommended it. If inflation returns as I suspect it will, you'll wish you got in. The 10-year Treasury is inched up to 0.76. That means that the 3.1517 interest rates you've been getting on 30-year money, that's going to go away pretty soon. So you got to get out there and buy a house. But right now is the time to buy gold. Birch Gold will help you diversify into a rollover where physical gold is stored in their vaults and you have your name on it and it actually belongs to you. 10 to 20% of your retirement in physical precious metals, or buy physical precious metals for your safety deposit box. The Dow went up 526 points yesterday. The NASDAQ went up 170. The S&P went up 58. Across the sea, it's a mixed market this morning. England thinks it's going to be a good day. Germany thinks it's really only down 0.05%, so it doesn't know what it's doing. Oil is off at 37, but like I say, gold at 1721. Good entry point. Birch Gold via hughgold.com. When I come back, I'll also check in for you what the president had to say about police reform. And understand this from the British Telegraph. Private schools set to ignore the government and open in September, come what may. The private schools of the United Kingdom are going back to school because, as anyone who reads the data knows, children are not at risk. Some of their older teachers, if they're over 55, maybe over 60, certainly over 70, should not go back to school, but the children should be back in school in the United States. And if they're not, look at your local union officials and call your local school board, because it's ridiculous. I'll be right back, America. Wednesday morning edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Heard somebody the other day say, Drew Brees made a gutsy statement in favor of the flag, the American flag. Really? And I said to myself, well, that's Drew Brees. He's always been a class act. And he doesn't agree with this kneeling, and said so. Now, why that is some sort of great act of courage says a whole lot about where we are in our society. And then something else happened. You know what that something else is? He apologized. I should have known more. I didn't realize. Have a much greater understanding now. What is going on? This is the opposite of the racism that the people seem to think exists in this country. Zero tolerance. I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or our country. Let me just tell you what I see or what I feel when the national anthem is played and when I look at the flag of the United States. End of quote. That's how I feel. I'm supposed to apologize for that? Did he make demands that his teammates not kneel? No. Did he call out any of his teammates for kneeling by name? No. I disagree with it, and therefore I've got to apologize?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Exclusive from General Flynn. This is at westernjournal.com. Freedom is oxygen, like the air we breathe that keeps our lungs full and our hearts beating. The celestial feeling of freedom brings a sense of peace to our souls. Freedom must never be taken for granted. Securing our freedom demands a high price, and that price requires hard work and sacrifice. Both will bind us all by the value they produce, but only if we are willing to seek new opportunities and new ideas. Those who have sacrificed the most, those who have given the last true measure of devotion that derives from the love of faith, family, and the cause of freedom, for all of us to be free and for the betterment of our republic and the free world, cannot be allowed to have died in vain. Theirs is the ultimate sacrifice, and heaven is their reward. Our future, the future of our children and grandchildren, and the future of our country are at stake. God will not give way to the care of the devil. Country are at stake. God will not give way to the care of the devil or allow us to be left to the evil vices of those who would steal our freedom in the dark of night. He will not. Instead, God will stand with us as he always does. Hard work and personal sacrifice still very much matter. Being a good person and showing kindness to others still matter. Is that General Mike Flynn, my friend? Or is it Pastor Flynn? Wow.
Keep up. America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, the President of the United States, signed an executive order on police reform yesterday. Here is the first thing he had to say. Cut number 7, Donald Trump.
And thank you all for being here as we take historic action to deliver a future of safety and security for Americans of every race, religion, color, and creed. We're joined today by law enforcement professionals and community leaders. Though we may all come from different places and different backgrounds, we're united by our desire to ensure peace and dignity and equality for all Americans. I've just concluded a meeting with incredible families, just incredible families that have been through so much. The families of Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, Antoine Rose, Jamel Roberson, Adiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Darius Tarver, Cameron Lamb, and Everett Palmer. These are incredible people, and it's so sad. Many of these families lost their loved ones in deadly interactions with police. To all of the hurting families, I want you to know that all Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain. We are one nation, we grieve together, and we heal together. I can never imagine your pain or the depth of your anguish, but I can promise to fight for justice for all of our people.
He went on to say this, cut number 8, again with the families of many victims of excessive force by the police in front of him, cut number 8.
Lamb and Everett Palmer. These are incredible people, and it's so sad. Many of these families lost their loved ones in deadly interactions with police. To all of the hurting families, I want you to know that all Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain. We are one nation, we grieve together, and we heal together. I can never imagine your pain or the depth of your anguish, but I can promise to fight for justice for all of our people. And I gave a commitment to all of those families today with Senator Tim Scott and Attorney General Bill Barr.
Now, the president is going to continue on today to back Tim Scott. And I have just tweeted out, I hope you follow me over at hughhewitt.com. Tim Scott earlier this morning said tomorrow morning, that's today at 9:30 a.m., we will introduce the Justice Act focusing on police reform, accountability, and transparency. The American people have spoken and we hear you. Senator John Cornyn 3 minutes ago said, shocking thought, Democrats could allow the chamber to debate Scott's bill and try to amend it. This would be the legislative process working. Democrats could force some tough votes for the GOP. But as we have seen in Politico Playbook this morning, Democrats have pegged Tim Scott's bill as not going far enough. They are going to refuse to consider the bill. So police reform is not going to happen because Democrats want it as an issue, not as a problem to be solved. I hope people understand that's the radical nature of the Democratic Party. That is the radical nature of the Democratic Party. This is Donald Trump talking about what could be done. Cut number 9.
Americans can achieve anything when we work together as one national family. To go forward, we must seek cooperation, not confrontation. We must build upon our heritage, not tear it down. And we must cherish the principles of America's founding as we strive to deliver safe, beautiful, elegant justice.
All we need to do is have Democrats act like normal people instead of politicizing every issue. Tim Scott knows what needs to be done. It's in a bill. The Senate could pass it today. Democrats are going to block it. Why would you vote for a Democrat unless you want a revolution? But many of them do. AOC and the squad, they are the hard left. They run the Democratic Party. It's not Joe Biden. He's a figurehead, and you need to know that. I'll be right back. Senator Josh Hawley coming up.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Hey, folks, welcome back. I'm talking to Charlie Kirk. Charlie, one of the most disturbing things I've seen recently is some of these activists who are clearly bullies. I mean, there's a violence. You can feel it, that they're very angry and they're approaching strangers on the street and demanding that these strangers take a knee or that the cops take a knee. And I just think I've never seen anything so ugly that cops are being yelled at to take a knee. I mean, they should say, well, I'll take a knee if you take a knee for Jesus Christ. You go first.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point, and I'm going to use it, which is, these are people that won't kneel for God, but they'll kneel because of some sort of pre-described class guilt. And so this is a really important point, Eric, which is this whole idea of white privilege is a racist and sinister lie that is taught to our kids from a very, very young age. And I find the whole idea morally reprehensible, that your identity, your skin color, that's not even your identity, by the way, that's just your appearance. Let's just make that very clear. That identity actually can mean a lot more. It could be your thoughts, your feelings, your worldview. And actually what has made the West so different, which was an idea that Jesus talked about, and people don't recognize this, is that equality under the law was nowhere to be seen. I mean, the Roman Republic paled in comparison to the Christian ethic. When Christ said, no, you're all equal under the eyes of God. We just forget, and we just throw that all out in our society. That's why Trump holding up that Bible was so significant.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Here's the former vice president asserting that the sitting president is going to attempt to steal the election on November 3rd. This is what he said.
It's my greatest concern, my single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election. This is the guy who said that all mail-in ballots are fraudulent, direct voting by mail, while he sits behind the desk in the Oval Office and writes his mail-in ballot to vote in the primary.
That's his biggest fear, is that Donald Trump will steal the election. So here we go again with, it was Russia, right? Russia interfered with the election in 2016. Russia got Trump elected, according to the narrative that resulted in an investigation, which led to a complete rebuke of that dubious claim. But it looks like they're going to go back to it again. They're going to go back to election fraud.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
What is the current state of allowance for church attendance?
You know, it's remarkable in different areas of the country. You have certain states who are abiding by the Constitution and deciding on a neutral basis if we're letting people to congregate, whether they're secular or religious, will do it in an even-handed fashion. But there are several states, like Nevada, that have chosen to treat churches and religious organizations worse. So you can go to a casino with hundreds or thousands of your best friends, but you can't go to church with 50 other people.
How do they answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, essential and what's not essential. And rather than putting church and spiritual things and worship in the essential category, and so then they justify it by it's not a necessity for people. And I think that's something the government shouldn't be doing.
So in effect, at least in California, I would imagine, churches are on a par with nail salons.
Sometimes nail salons are treated better than churches, and that's another thing that's remarkable. If you look at the way they categorize different types of uses, it seems like churches are always on the bottom end of the list, and so they'll reopen, as people know they've done in phases. Well, they'll decide that, for example, we've had several cases where they're open bars before they're open churches, or nail salons, or, as I mentioned, casinos, or things like that. And so the way, I'm not sure how they get to the conclusion about what's necessary or not, but they're certainly putting religious worship.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer.
I'm Hugh Hewitt. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri is one of my favorite senators, but he has exercised over the decision of the United States Supreme Court to interpret the 1964 Civil Rights Act Title VII to include LGBTQ rights within the definition of sex, meaning you cannot discriminate in the employment based upon LGBTQ. And I have been arguing statutory decision, not a big deal. Wait and see what they do in Our Lady of Guadalupe. Josh Hawley, though, did not wait. Josh Hawley has exercised, and because he represents a lot of the conservative legal movement, he went to the Senate floor yesterday. I want you to hear what he had to say. Cut number 15.
I have to say, I agree with the news reports that have said that this is truly a seismic decision. It is truly a historic decision. It is truly a historic piece of legislation. This piece of legislation changes the scope of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It changes the meaning of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It changes the text of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In fact, you might well argue it is one of the most significant and far-reaching updates to that historic piece of legislation since it was adopted all of those years ago. And make no doubt about it. I mean, make no mistake. This decision, this piece of legislation, will have effects that range from employment law to sports to churches. There's only one problem with this piece of legislation. It was issued by a court, not by a legislature. It was written by judges, not by the elected representatives of the people. And it did what this Congress has pointedly declined to do for years now, which is to change the text and the meaning and the application and the scope of a historic piece of legislation. You know, it's significant, I think, Madam President, for another reason as well. This decision, this Bostock case, and the majority who wrote it, it represents the end of something. It represents the end of the conservative legal movement or the conservative legal project as we know it. After Bostock, that effort as we know it, as it has existed up to now, it's over. And I say this because if textualism and originalism give you this decision, if you can invoke textualism and originalism in order to reach a decision, an outcome that fundamentally changes the scope and meaning and application of statutory law, then textualism and originalism and all of those phrases don't mean much at all. And if those are the things that we've been fighting for, it's what I thought we had been fighting for, those of us who call ourselves legal conservatives. If we've been fighting for originalism and textualism, and this is the result of that, then I have to say, it turns out we haven't been fighting for very much. Or maybe we've been fighting for quite a lot, but it's been exactly the opposite of what we thought we were fighting for. Now, this is a very significant decision, and it marks a turning point for every conservative, and it marks a turning point for the legal conservative movement. You know, the legal conservative project has always depended on one group of people in particular in order to carry the weight of the votes, to actually support this out in public, to get out there and make it possible electorally, and those are religious conservatives. Now, I'm one myself. Evangelicals, conservative Catholics, conservative Jews, they're the ones, let's be honest, they're the ones who have been the core of the legal conservative effort. And the reason for that is, it dates back decades now, back to the 1970s, the reason for that is these religious conservatives from different backgrounds, but what they have consistently sought together was protection for their right to worship, for their right to freely exercise their faith as the First Amendment guarantees, for their right to gather in their communities, for their right to pursue the way of life that their scriptures variously command and that the Constitution absolutely protects. That's what they have asked for. That's what they have sought all these years. But as to those religious conservatives, how do they fare in yesterday's decision? What will this decision mean, this rewrite of Title VII? What will it mean for churches? What will it mean for religious schools? What will it mean for religious charities? Well, in the many pages of its opinion, the majority, 33 pages to be exact, the majority does finally get around to saying something about religious liberty on one page. What does it say? Here's the substance of the court's analysis. How the doctrines protecting religious liberty interact with Title VII, as reinterpreted now by the court, are questions for future cases. Let's have that again. How the doctrines protecting religious liberty interact with Title VII are questions for future cases. Oh, no doubt they are. Huge questions. And we eagerly await what our super legislators across the street in the Supreme Court building there at 1 First Street, how they will legislate on this question. What will become of church hiring liberty? What will become of the policies of religious schools? What will become of the fate of religious charities? Who knows? Who's to say? They're questions for future cases. Now, I will say this in defense of the court. It is difficult to anticipate in one case all future possible implications. That's why courts are supposed to leave legislating to legislators. That's why Article 3 does not give the United States Supreme Court or any federal court the power to legislate, but only the judicial power to decide cases and controversies, not to decide policies. But I will also say this, that everybody knows, every honest person knows, that the laws in this country today, they're made almost entirely by unelected bureaucrats and courts. They're not made by this body. Why not? Because this body doesn't want to make law. That's why not. Because in order to make law, you have to take a vote. In order to vote, you have to be on the record. And to be on the record is to be held accountable, and that's what this body fears above all else, Madam President. This body is terrified of being held accountable for anything on any subject. So can we be so surprised that where the legislature fears to tread, where the Article 1 body, this body that is charged with the Constitution for legislating, refuses to do its job, courts rush in, and bureaucrats too. Are they accountable to the people? No, not at all. Do we have any recourse? Not really. Now what must we do? Well, now we must wait to see what the super legislators will say about our rights in future cases. If this case makes anything clear, it is that the bargain that has been offered to religious conservatives for years now is a bad one. It's time to reject it. The bargain has never been necessarily explicitly articulated, but religious conservatives know what it is. The bargain is that you go along with the party establishment, you support their policies and priorities, or at least keep your mouth shut about it, and in return, the establishment will put some judges on the bench who supposedly will protect your constitutional rights to freedom of worship, to freedom of exercise. That's been what we're told for years now. And we were told that we're supposed to shut up while the party establishment focuses more on cutting taxes and handing out favors for corporations, multinational corporations who don't share our values, who will not stand up for American principles, who are only too happy to ship American jobs overseas. But we're supposed to say nothing about that. We're supposed to keep our mouths shut because maybe we'll get a judge out of the deal. That was the implicit bargain. We're supposed to keep our mouths shut while the party establishment opens borders, while the party establishment pursues ruinous trade policies. We're supposed to keep our mouths shut while those at the upper end of the income bracket get all of the attention, while working families and college students and those who don't want to go to college but can't get a good job, while they get what? What attention? Workers, children. What about parents looking for help with the cost of raising children? Looking for help with the culture in which they have to raise children, looking for help with the communities, rebuilding the communities in which they must carry out their family life. What about college students trying to find an education that isn't ruinously expensive and then figure out some way to pay back that ruinous debt? What about those who don't have a college degree and don't want one but like to get a good job? What about them? Now, we're supposed to stay quiet about all of that and more because there be pro-Constitution religious liberty judges, except that there aren't, except for that these judges don't follow the Constitution, except for these judges invoke textualism and originalism in order to reach their preferred outcome.
That's one. Now, look, I think Senator Hawley is extremely talented, smart, may become president someday, and he is not right. I don't know that he's wrong, but he's not right. That's because maybe Thursday, certainly next week, the court is going to decide a case called Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is going to confront the very question of Title VII and religious schools that Senator Hawley raised. Moreover, the judicial project is not over. Moreover, the bargain is defined too narrowly. The bargain has been what's in it for religious conservatives: national security and originalism. And one judge's single opinion, whatever you think of it. And there is, by the way, an argument that Gorsuch is not wrong. It's not persuasive for many conservatives, but there's an argument that he's not wrong. There is a lot of judging left to be done. And I am afraid that Senator Hawley is encouraging religious conservatives to abandon the field when they've got to take to the field in greater numbers. Court is going to change incredibly. By the way, there have been 51 confirmed, 2 more in the queue, originalists confirmed to the federal circuit courts, which hear 95% of all cases, and they will restore religious liberty throughout the land. And I believe the Supreme Court will as well protect it in Our Lady of Guadalupe, as they did in Hobby Lobby. I believe that will happen. So I believe this is an overstatement and overreaction. It is certainly too quick to draw. And it's passionate, it's articulate. He's a former attorney general. He is a former Chief Justice Roberts clerk. He himself could easily end up going on to the Supreme Court someday, though I think his ambitions are for the Oval Office. And Josh Hawley is extremely talented, but this is too quick, too alarmist, not conservative, and suggests that the game is over when the game is only afoot. So stay tuned. Time for my relief factor. I did not run. I walked a couple of miles slowly yesterday because Schroeder from Butler is here, so I couldn't go out. I blame Schroeder. He just wanted to amble along in Indiana style. You know, people don't run in Indiana. They plow. And so we plowed yesterday, but I got my relief factor in my hand anyway. I carry Kirkman Resveratrol Omega with my lukewarm coffee, because today I will be out and about, assuming that it's not raining and it's not pollen season. I keep clearing my throat because it is pollen season. Support for the relief of the minor aches and pains that accompany any kind of exercise. You got to keep moving. We did yesterday. We did it at an Indiana pace, which is, you slow down in Indiana. There is no light there, and so people go to bed at 7 o'clock. So in Indiana, people need this for the daytime. In the rest of the country, you need your relieffactor.com all day long. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by the Job Creators Network Foundation.
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
What do you make of what's going on in our streets, these protests, these riots?
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Things that were done to that poor individual, Mr. Floyd, are things that should not be done to an animal. And that's enough to enrage anyone. So I understand the rage. But unfortunately, there are others who are hiding behind
Hugh Hewitt Show
peaceful protesters
on the Salem Radio
who
Network
are not peaceful
returns
people
from
at
break
all.
in 2 minutes
And I think
and 45 seconds.
dishonors the man who died. It also dishonors Dr. Martin Luther King, who was an advocate for nonviolent protests and was able to bring about the greatest civic changes ever in this country. And I don't know. How many
Hugh Hewitt Show
young black
on the
men
Salem
are killed
Radio
every
Network
weekend in
returns
Chicago?
from break in 1 minute
Because it's
and
black on
45
black
seconds.
crime. Don't care about that.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com. A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, playing a little bit more of Senator Josh Hawley's overreaction yesterday. And I say this because it's important for people who value religious freedom, freedom of all sort, federalism, structural federalism, Constitution, to not give up on the game because of one decision that they think might be wrong and one misapplication of originalism, which might not be a misapplication. Far too much is at stake for Josh Hawley's pessimism, which is the pessimism of a young man and not the realism of an older man like me. It's nothing compared to Casey, Senator Hawley. When Casey came down and we expected that Roe v. Wade would be repealed, When Casey came down, that was a blow. But you don't stop fighting. You don't give up. You just keep trying to put people on the bench who will apply the Constitution and the laws as they are written with the intent with which they were written by Article 1. Here's the conclusion of Senator Hawley's remarks ripping the court for the Bostock decision authored by Justice Gorsuch 2 days ago, cut number 16.
Now, I want to be clear. I am not personally criticizing any justice who joined the majority opinion or wrote it. I believe 100% that the justice who principally authored this opinion, Justice Gorsuch, and those who joined him are sincere and who were writing to the best of their ability, reasoning to the best of their ability, and the opinion is, it is, whatever else you might say about it, it is not sloppily reasoned. Now, I think that they were doing what they thought was best and using all of the skills and gifts that they had. No, I question how we got here. I question how judges who hold to this philosophy ended up on that bench. I question the bargain that people of faith have been offered and asked to hold to for all of these years. And the truth is, to those who have said, who have objected to my own questioning of judicial nominees in this body, to those who said I was wrong to question judges who came before the Judiciary Committee, to those who chided me for asking tough questions, even of nominees by a Republican president, for those who said that I was slowing the process down and I was out of line, for the supposedly conservative groups who threatened to buy television time in my own state to punish me for asking questions about conservative judges, I just have this to say. This is why I ask questions. This is why I won't stop. And I wish some more people would ask some harder questions. Because this outcome is not acceptable. And the bargain which religious conservatives have been offered is not tenable.
Stop.
So I would.
So Senator Hawley just said he's a results-oriented conservative. I am not. I am in favor of asking questions, but judges can't answer questions that will commit them before a case is asked. I don't know that anyone thought Justice Gorsuch didn't deserve their vote. And if you understood Justice Hawley correctly, and I did, he is paying homage to Justice Gorsuch's reasoning. It is not without merit. Not how I would have written it. I would have sided with Justice Alito. I believe Chief Justice Roberts cast a strategic vote in order to assign the opinion with to Justice Gorsuch. So I think it is an iconoclastic opinion by an otherwise very reliable judge, and one about which he might change his mind when he deals with the consequences down the road. It is. I thought it was absurd when it was argued, and I thought he was just being theatrical from the bench, but he really has persuaded himself this is correct from a textualist point of view, but it's not. But a one-off doesn't bother me. Tell me what happens, all right, in Our Lady of Guadalupe. And then I expect the senator to take the floor again and say, oops. And by all means, ask all the questions you want. Don't get into a religious test. That is unconstitutional, and only Democrats do that when they say the faith lived deep within you. And be prepared for ongoing, serious conversations with nominees because you have to get back to originalism. This, by the way, has almost no consequence. Almost none. Because if you're a freedom and federalism conservative and you care about preserving freedom of all sorts, First Amendment freedoms to speak and to assemble and to petition the government, Second Amendment freedoms to own firearms to protect yourself with, Fifth Amendment freedoms on due process and property rights, if you believe in First Amendment freedoms on religious liberty and the right to the free exercise, if you're a federalism person, you believe in structural federalism as a keynote, I have seen nothing from the Roberts Court to alarm me, nothing at all. Only good news. And so I just think it's a little bit of a hair trigger reaction by Senator Hawley, for whom I have great admiration, with whom I've appeared in public, who I know. And I believe, talk to me after Our Lady of Guadalupe comes down. Because if Our Lady of Guadalupe protects with great vigor religious institutions in their hiring practices, and say a religious institution, and this would, by the way, apply for a closely held corporation, religious people and religious organizations don't, for example, Roman Catholics don't have to hire divorced people who remarry. That's that simple to me. If you're a Catholic high school, you cannot be obliged to hire someone who's divorced and remarried. That is the essence of religious liberty, and that is what we need to preserve. Don't go anywhere, America. Hour number 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show begins with Steve Kornacki as we talk about the reaction in the polling to defund the police. Democrats want to defund the police. Do you? Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Is it of importance to us in interpreting the events of the last 2+ weeks that we are seeing all of this happen predominantly in hardcore Democrat-run cities, Gianna?
You know what's interesting about that is that Democrats won't even take credit for the fact that a lot of their policies have caused this to happen. You think about somebody like Joe Biden, who goes into George Floyd funeral with a video message talking about racial reconciliation and healing. Meanwhile, he's a big part of the reason why we have so much division in this country today. You think about the '94 crime bill. If we're going to talk about liberal cities, you can't forget about my hometown of Chicago, where you got a mayor there who provided, or rather asked for, 375 National Guardsmen in the city of Chicago and put them all in the downtown area. Meanwhile, the poor black areas on the south side and west sides are left to fend for themselves. You're talking about minority-owned businesses ruined, which they don't have money to come back. Some of these folks don't even have insurance. And that's across all American spectrums, whether you be white, black, or indifferent. We just lived through COVID. And now you got these liberals whose policies have created a huge mess from a financial tax purpose, a tax basis. And now you're disenfranchising poor people more by way of your policies, even through protests and looting. This is unimaginable. Who would have thought that this is where we would be in 2020? But if anybody is really listening and watching what's going on, this should be the best reason not to vote for liberals in any capacity. That's any office, whether it be president, Senate, House, state Senate, state House, mayor, any office. You shouldn't be voting for Democrats. And that's what I've taken away from this time.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
If you actually care about Black lives, you have an obligation to distance yourself from Black Lives Matter, the organization, the hashtag movement, whatever it is. I want to get that out up front. But Horace, how have you been processing this?
So our group, Project 21, was actually formed in the wake of the Rodney King riots. And several of us, I'm a founding member of the organization, but several of us were watching CNN and hearing this idea that it is the normal and legitimate way that Black Americans express their frustrations with civic life, that they run into the nearest Best Buy and grab as many DVD players as they can. And we knew, I knew this, my associates that I grew up with, and it turns out people from all walks of life knew that this is so far from reality. And we decided to form an organization that would say, we're Black Americans, and we want people to understand that this universal vision or perspective that's being put forward on the mainstream media about who Black Americans are doesn't represent or reflect the reality. And we are going to start having people that will appear on the news, appear in print, appear on the radio waves saying, hey, wait a second, there's a different perspective. When Martin Luther King said that people would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, we were astonished to hear that what people were saying is okay to say.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
I want to share with you Raynard Jackson's comments because this came from the White House, where the president is sort of, in his way, on a listening tour. You know, I know that the rap against Donald Trump is that he doesn't listen to anybody, and that, of course, is a lot of hogwash. He does listen. He ultimately makes decisions based on his gut, on his instincts, on what got him to the White House in the first place. But quite frankly, anybody who's been around him recognizes he does spend a lot of time listening to advisors, listening to people who are willing to bend his ear. So here's Raynard Jackson.
Well, what I'd like to say to you, Mr. President, is kind of off the beaten path. I'd like to say to all the media assembled here that I wish they would quit lying about what you've done specifically for the black community. So you got radical liberal journalists like Joy Reid from MSNBC, Don Lemon from CNN, Roland Martin, who are putting more poison into the black community than any drug dealer, who are killing more black folks than any white person with a sheet over their face. How are they doing it? Spreading these lies about the economy you had, Mr. President, before the virus was a continuation of Obama. That's just factually not true. I have a degree in accounting. I keep up with the economy. They're lying. So to all these folks on MSNBC, CNN, Roland Martin, what, you're afraid to have real black Republicans who know what the hell they're talking about? If you want to know the truth, if you want us to dissect the Obama economy, let's do it. And I think, Mr. President, your record will win the debate. Thank you.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
By the way, if nobody ends up seriously ill, let alone dead, from all of the rioting and protesting of the last week, will you finally realize that how evil the continuation of lockdown is and the destroying of businesses? The scientists that have led us to this hysteria should have their names implanted in people's minds as destroyers of society. I knew it from the beginning, the hysteria. There's been hysteria over COVID. There's hysteria over police brutality. COVID exists, police brutality exists, but it doesn't mean that the reactions are coherent. So anyway, Biden said in the middle of this address, just happened to catch it, something to the effect, this is the new line. We need to live in America where a black person does not fear that he will be killed that day. Is he speaking about the inner city and killed by a fellow black? No, he's not speaking about that. He's talking about the police. That's the point. There is such a fear in the inner city. Funny, if you talk about where blacks really are suffering, you're a racist. If you talk about blacks where they're really not suffering, where it's minimal, then you're pro-black. Because the issue isn't black-white. The issue is right-left.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings from inside the Beltway. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for joining me wherever you are this morning, from San Francisco's early commute to Miami's already in progress nightmare. Good to have you with me, and I'm glad you'll stay with me throughout the hour. I'll be joined by Mike Gallagher a little bit later, the congressman extraordinaire from Wisconsin. And Tom Holland from England, our historian in residence, joins me next hour. Right now, I've got Steve Kornacki, pollster extraordinaire, analyst extraordinaire. He is NBC News national political correspondent. Follow him on Twitter at Steve Kornacki. Good morning, Steve. How are you and where are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm doing well, and I'm in my apartment.
And so, what is the? This has not got anything to do with you, especially. I'm just curious what Manhattan has been like for the last 3 months. I lived there in 1980. I go there often. I haven't been there since the start of the shutdown. It must be surreal.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the interesting thing is I actually get up to 30 Rock, where NBC is most days. I end up walking in now, and I've noticed the walk for the first month, the streets were completely empty. You could just walk into the street and not worry about getting hit by a car or anything. For the last month, you see the traffic coming back. I'm not sure where they're going, but there's a lot more, waiting for traffic lights and waiting for cars to pass. So I do just feel more going on out there now in the last month.
And a straight observation level mask usage in Northern Virginia, it's over. 1 out of 20 people, and I'm among the 20, will wear them outside. People will wear them in supermarkets. Nobody wears them exercising. What's your experience in Manhattan?
Yeah, I don't see people running with them. I don't see people on bikes with them. I do think at the sort of pedestrian level, I'd say it's about 50%. You see a lot of it. It's not universal, and it's definitely not for exercise.
All right, to expertise, I would like to know what you think the American people think of, quote, defund the police.
Well, we've got polling on it, so we've got some numbers. I thought ABC had an interesting poll on it at the end of last week. When you just throw the concept of defund the police at people and don't give it any context, 34% support. So it's overwhelming, basically 2/3 opposition. Notably, though, it is a majority, 55% of Democrats who support when you say defund the police. So overall wide opposition, but within the Democratic Party, there is support for that. When you add in...
That's a dilemma, isn't it, Steve, for the Democrats?
I think it is. And then when you take the second question they ask and you add in, you've got folks out there who say, well, it doesn't really mean defund the police. It means take some of the money and reprioritize it to social services and this sort of thing. When you ask the question that way, there's still strong opposition. In the ABC poll, that bumped support up to 39%, with 60% disapproval. And again, among Democrats, that got it up to 60%. And so, I think the dilemma there for Democrats is yes, it's they've got a presidential nominee who says he doesn't want to defund the police. But if you take a look at, what's happening in Los Angeles, take a look at, New York City, getting rid of the plainclothes unit yesterday, talk about, cutting budgets, reallocating budgets, look at Minneapolis. I do think maybe at the municipal level and among some members of Congress, at least, that is there.
I think you're going to hear it a lot through the fall, and my party is going to try and stick it to the Democratic Party and paste it on them like the kick me, see a sign of old from elementary school, defund the police. Tell me about Eliot Engel in New York. Have you seen any numbers there, and any other endangered old dinosaur Democrat who faces an AOC-sponsored candidate?
So this is interesting, right? Eliot Engel's been a member of Congress for 30-plus years right now. There is a poll out this morning from a group called Data for Progress. Now, they are a progressive group. They definitely have an agenda. But I mention this because they began doing polling during the Democratic primaries, and their numbers in a number of cases were pretty spot on. They did have a couple misses, but they had some that were spot on. They were polling some places that the media wasn't polling as much. So I take them seriously. They have a poll out this morning that now has Engel down double digits.
Ooh.
Challenger. Now these are, we saw in 2018 with the Crowley AOC race that, turnout can be very low for these. It's very unpredictable in this environment. The mail-in aspect of it can change things. So we will see. It's hard to figure out in a poll what the electorate's actually going to look like. But I took note of that, absolutely. You've got the president of AOC. You've got a candidate there in Engel who's, I think his time in the district may be limited in the last couple of years. So maybe an opportunity there. And yeah, I'm definitely on alert for that one right now.
Now, tell me what your data shows you about Seattle and what the American people think of it. The president is upset that there isn't more attention being paid to it. So I think I know what the American people think about it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's another one of those when you start seeing numbers. The public, defund the police, as we say, it doesn't do well. The idea of violent protest doesn't do well. The idea of disobeying law, it doesn't do well. So, yeah, I think you do see those overall, sort of an overall view there that the public believes there needs to be police reform. The public believes there are too many of these incidents, too many of these incidents that lead to deaths that involve police. The public now believes this has been a major shift in the last few years. It believes a lot more in the idea that there's widespread and even systemic racism. That's a change in the last 5 years. You see bigger numbers there. But it hasn't changed on some of those core issues of core questions, I guess you could even say, of law and order.
So, Steve, the big $64,000 question is, how much is the Democratic Party becoming identified with the radical, the challenge to Elliott angle, the defund the police, the Seattle occupation? How much is a Democratic Party candidate down ballot in, say, Florida going to be identified with this?
So this is where I'm kind of two minds, and I think politically, if you just look at it, I think the Democrats might have caught a break this year in having Joe Biden as their nominee, because Biden, his position is going to be, I'm opposed to defunding the police. And I look at some of those other Democrats who were running and who had a real shot at the nomination, and I could certainly imagine a scenario right now where one of them as the nominee would be out there, if not endorsing defund the police, but would be playing footsie with it. And would be creating a much bigger opportunity at the top of the ticket to make that an issue. I think a lot does flow in politics, fair or not. I think a lot does flow from the top of the ticket. So for Democrats to have a nominee who's not going to get on board with that, I think that will provide some cover for them. But I think, as I said, those changes you see in the polling, we're seeing major changes. This is a long-term thing. It's not just in the last month in the Democratic Party, in the demographic makeup of the Democratic Party, in the issues that animate the Democratic electorate. We're seeing it, as I just said, at some of the municipal levels. You're seeing it with members of Congress. I think there's a longer-term trend here that's going to outlast the 2020 election, however it goes, in the Democratic Party. That's going to result in some new issues really getting prominence. But I think right now I just look at it and I say Biden saying he opposes defund the police. That makes it. I think that will make it tougher for Republicans to attach that to Democrats at least this year.
Steve Kornacki, is there a, quote, silent majority?
Well, I guess the answer is we'll find out on Election Day. Where the divergence is right now, as I said, there is a clear majority that opposes defunding the police. There's a clear majority that doesn't like the idea of violent protest. That sort of thing is still out there. But it does not get attached. That sentiment right now in polling does not get attached to the president, because there is also a clear majority in polling right now of voters who say they don't like the way the president has led in this environment. So when you talk about, I guess, the classic silent majority with Nixon back there in the early 70s, you had those same views about, violent protest and order and those sorts of things. But you also had support for the president, and you had alarm at George McGovern and where the Democratic Party was going. Right now, I see almost a split there. I see some issues where, at least potentially Republicans could have an opening against Democrats. But I don't see Trump in the polling right now capitalizing on that. And I also, as I said, I don't see Biden on that key question, some of those key questions where there are members of this party who would take that step. I don't see Biden taking that step. And I think politically that might be advantageous.
Quick question, Steve. We made a lot of news with Ben Carson on the show earlier this week when I asked him if he was going to persuade the president that kneeling for the national anthem didn't mean now what it meant 3 years ago. Because I don't believe it does to the average viewer. I don't think it means today as much as it did 3 years ago. Do you see polling to support my view and Ben Carson's view that it has changed?
It's changed. It's still a split. The polling I saw this week, basically found dead even there in terms of folks who said, this is a legitimate political protest versus, disrespecting the flag. It was overwhelming opposition a couple of years ago. Now it's split.
Is the split 50-50?
basically, I think it was like 48-47, something like that.
Steve Kornacki, always the facts. Great to have you. Follow him on Twitter at Steve Kornacki. Follow me to the next segment, America. It's Hugh Hewitt.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by the Job Creators Network Foundation.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
I want to share with you Raynard Jackson's comments because this came from the White House, where the president is sort of, in his way, on a listening tour. You know, I know that the rap against Donald Trump is that he doesn't listen to anybody. And that, of course, is a lot of hogwash. He does listen. He ultimately makes decisions based on his gut, on his instincts, on what got him to the White House in the first place. But quite frankly, anybody who's been around him recognizes he does spend a lot of time listening to advisors, listening to people who are willing to bend his ear. So here's Raynard Jackson.
Well, what I'd like to say to you, Mr. President, is kind of off the beaten path. I'd like to say to all the media assembled here that I wish they would quit lying about what you've done specifically for the black community. So you got radical liberal journalists like Joy Reid from MSNBC, Don Lemon from CNN, Roland Martin, who are putting more poison into the black community than any drug dealer, who are killing more black folks than any white person with a sheet over their face. How are they doing it? Spreading these lies about the economy you had, Mr. President, before the virus was a continuation of Obama. That's just factually not true. I have a degree in accounting. I keep up with the economy. They're lying. So to all these folks on MSNBC, CNN, Roland Martin, what, you're afraid to have real black Republicans who know what the hell they're talking about? If you want to know the truth, if you want us to dissect the Obama economy, let's do it. And I think, Mr. President, your record will win the debate. Thank you.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
By the way, if nobody ends up seriously ill, let alone dead, from all of the rioting and protesting of the last week, will you finally realize that how evil the continuation of lockdown is and the destroying of businesses? The scientists that have led us to this hysteria should have their names implanted in people's minds as destroyers of society. I knew it from the beginning, the hysteria. There's been hysteria over COVID. There's hysteria over police brutality. COVID exists, police brutality exists, but it doesn't mean that the reactions are coherent. So anyway, Biden said in the middle of this address, just happened to catch it, something to the effect, this is the new line. We need to live in America where a black person does not fear that he will be killed that day. Is he speaking about the inner city and killed by a fellow black? No, he's not speaking about that. He's talking about the police. That's the point. There is such a fear in the inner city. Funny, if you talk about where blacks really are suffering, you're a racist. If you talk about blacks where they're really not suffering, where it's minimal, then you're pro-black. Because the issue isn't black-white. The issue is right-left.
Keep up with what's trending. America has been doing some soul-searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside of the Beltway. Time to check what markets did yesterday and overnight in Europe. Brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. I had a friend just bought a house. With Andrew and Todd. 3.15%. 3.125%. As I say, these are the lowest home mortgage interest rates in America. Now, that was a home purchase. That might be a little bit lower than a home refinance. If you're a veteran, of course, you can buy a home for nothing down, and they have veterans loans at AndrewandTodd.com. They are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They lend money. So from soup to nuts, they get to the letter to qualify. You give the letter to the broker and you negotiate with the seller. The seller agrees upon a price. You agree to it, and then Andrew and Todd get the money to closing. Their record, I believe, is 23 days. Now, that is like the land speed record for a loan, unless you walk in with all cash and you drop it on the escrow. I mean, you can always buy a house for all cash, but it usually requires 6 weeks. AndrewandTodd.com, they're the best. And I've known Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian for a long time. You can call them at 888-888-1172. They have realtors across the United States. They have financial advisors across the United States. And during this time of economic upheaval, I've been speaking specifically to older Americans who have to get money out of their house to live well. They do reverse mortgages. They're very careful about them. They will spend as much time as you need on the phone or online to explain them to you. 888-888-1172. It's a toll-free phone call. You can talk to Andrew or Todd at length or one of their team members. You find someone else you like better there. And they're in Southern California, but they do loans across the United States. AndrewandTodd.com. Yesterday, the Dow went up 526 points based upon extraordinary month-over-month retail sales. The NASDAQ went up 169 points. And that's because everybody is figuring that Amazon, which is a key component of NASDAQ, went up $42.50 yesterday. I own Amazon. It's the only stock I own. I haven't looked at Costco or Target or any of the other big retailers that sell over Walmart, etc. I assume they all did well because retail spending means people are buying things. They're buying different things and they're buying them differently, but they didn't spend anything in April and March during the great fear of the virus. And that great fear is fading to an intuitive common sense, and people are venturing out and they're buying and they're having it delivered at home. And so Amazon skyrocketed to $26.15 at close yesterday. And I would expect, again, I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, that all of these internet-based home delivery services, whether it is food or lawn chairs or barbecues, I haven't asked Rhett Rasmussen, my buddy who runs BestHotGrill.com, but I'll bet you they've sold more BestHotGrill.com month over month, the greatest increase ever, because people are staying home. They're eating out, but they're eating out in their backyard. I'll bet you patio furniture has gone through the roof. I'll bet you BestHotGrill.com. It's the best grill in America. And they don't pay me to say that right now. I'm just saying that because it's the grill in my backyard. It's the grill in my kids' backyard. It's the grill I tell everyone to buy. It's the best grill in America, BestHotGrill.com. I think that people have changed their consuming habits. But overseas at this hour, well into the trading day, as opposed to the United States, England is up well over 0.5%, and Germany is up 0.75%. So I think what we have seen for the last few days is going to continue. Mike Pence yesterday said we're reopening strong. Fox and Friends, cut number 6.
And I hope your viewers, I know there's there's some other networks out there that like to publish maps. They like to show entire states blocked red as cases are growing. But as we told governors yesterday, the reality is there's roughly only 11 counties in America out of more than 3,100 counties that are seeing any acceleration in new cases, and less than 2% of the counties in the entire country are seeing any significant increase in cases.
I wonder if you heard that anywhere. Americans intuit it's pretty safe. Not if you're old, not if you have a comorbidity, but Americans, you can't fool all the people all the time. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
For folks like you and me, this was a moment ago, especially for you. You lived through this. You were an adult. This was your friend. This was a student. And the parallels with what are happening in this country today are so striking. I mean, we could have talked about this book just because it's the 50th anniversary and it's a good book and it's interesting. And, you and I have met. But I mean, the parallels to what is happening right now in this country are just crazy similar. And so I do want to talk about that. Now, look, there's a lot of young people listening to this program who don't have a clue what was going on around that time. So frame it for us. In this novel, Hippies, which is based on real life events, obviously, you just told us 2 of your friends were killed. Students were killed. I mean, I still can't get my head around this.
All right. It was good.
No, go ahead. So frame it for people who don't know anything about Kent State or whatever.
Right. Well, back then in 1969, 1970, it was all about the Vietnam War, and the attitude of the country was changing. Like us baby boomers, when we were going off, we're graduating. Like when I was graduating from high school in '67, you were expected to go to Vietnam and defend the country, like our parents did, the World War II generation, and we were all for it. But then people started realizing this war was not a good war. There was no sense to it. That kids were getting killed at the same rate as World War II, and nothing was happening. I mean, Vietnam was no threat to the United States like the Germans with their A-bombs and their iron. Vietnam didn't even have a Navy or an Air Force or anything, And my friends were coming back. They went to Vietnam, and they came back and were telling horror stories. And so the whole mood of the country was changing. So the students started protesting.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Mayor Jenny Durkan appeared with Chris Cuomo on CNN and characterized this takeover of a neighborhood in Seattle where you just heard the police chief characterize people pelting police officers with projectiles, screaming, hacking, and ultimately taking it over. But the mayor says these patriots are sort of just having a giant, fun-filled block party.
So I don't have to tell you about the situation on the ground in your city, but in terms of how it looks to the rest of the country and the president teeing it up as basically ineptitude, the inability to control your own streets. Is that fair criticism?
So I know it will shock you that the president is perhaps not giving an accurate or truthful picture. We've got 4 blocks in Seattle that you just saw pictures of that is more like a block party atmosphere. It's not an armed takeover. It's not a military junta. We will make sure that we can restore this, but we have block parties and the like in this part of Seattle all the time. It's known for that. So I think the president, number one, there is no threat right now to the public, and we're taking that very seriously. We're meeting with businesses and residents. But what the president threatened is illegal and unconstitutional. And the fact that he can think he can just tweet that and not have ramifications is just wrong.
I don't even know where to begin.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
All right, perfect.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This is the state of play. And what is the response from the left? Mr. Mayor, please listen to Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State, where some of the worst violence is occurring, on his responsibility or lack thereof to the people of his state.
Thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely? Regarding the National Guard.
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that.
Oh, sorry.
From any credible source. Not that you're not credible. It's just like
Okay,
before I
sounds good, man.
espouse an opinion, I should know of which I speak.
Should a governor be laughing about losing control of the streets of one of his cities, Mr. Matt?
I'm not surprised, Sebastian. Are you?
I'm not, but what does this mean for the people living in Seattle in Washington State?
Well, I mean, I hope that the American people can observe all this and they can see there's no coincidence that the worst riots, the most destruction, the most loss of human life and property, members of a responsible political party.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. Got my Browns hat on. It's my protective wizardry shield against Mike Gallagher, congressman from Wisconsin, who always brings his Green Bay gear when we do Skype calls. Good morning, Congressman.
Oh, sorry. I was just reading When Pride Still Mattered, the biography of Vince Lombardi here. Sorry, you caught me at an interesting time here.
You know, that is an ancient book, and it's like the Packers fan to be living in the 60s. So I want you to come into the present with us 80 years later.
Are you both like 9?
Congressman, we've been rebuked. We've been rebuked officially by a producer who woke up. That's really bad. Congressman, I have a piece in the Washington Post this morning, title of which I don't pick the headlines, but it's not bad. The fourth rescue bill needs to repair damage done to economy and national security. I spent the weekend reporting on the people who call you China Mike over at the West Wing also told me what they want in phase 4. I don't know if you've read the column yet, but what do you want in phase 4 when it comes to national security spending?
I read the column, Hugh. I thought it was great. And as you point out, there are a couple of factors going on here. First and foremost, related to the crisis, we have to make sure our defense industry isn't endangered by any slowed orders of production during this crisis. Our industrial base has shrunk enough in recent decades that we can't afford to lose participants, large or small at this point. And secondarily, and predating the coronavirus crisis, DoD needed additional resources to implement the National Defense Strategy and build a 355-ship Navy in particular. And as you've long argued, this is the foundational project for the administration. And while we've made important progress, including awarding Northeast Wisconsin the new frigate contract, shipbuilding isn't cheap. And if we want these capabilities and the numbers our commanders say they need, we're going to have to pay for them. So I hope we consider the geopolitical situation as we consider a phase 4 bill.
Now, Congressman, I got some pushback from my editors. They wanted to fact check my assertion that the Navy has slow rolled the 355-ship plan. And I told them the president promised it in the Philadelphia shipyard 48 months ago, and we don't have it. I don't know what your definition of slow rolling is, but that's my definition of slow rolling. I don't expect you to criticize the Navy. They just gave your district a big, big deal for the frigate. But I mean, we don't have a plan, do we?
Well, and to your point, Hugh, I mean, we're still awaiting a new integrated naval force structure assessment. And this comes after, in recent years, Congress mandated.
Did we lose Congressman?
Force structure. I'm back.
You're back. Well, it's Wisconsin again. You know, when the snowstorms start up in June, it's always tough on the Skype transmission. But please tell us what we're awaiting.
Well, I got a couple of cows outside that are running on a loop, providing electricity to my house. But we're awaiting the integrated naval force structure assessment. This comes after multiple outside strategic reviews, and so we keep getting different assessments from the Navy on what they want the future fleet to look like. But I do think in any future fleet, we know we're going to have to expand the number of small surface combatants. And that's why one thing we need to think about doing is having between 55 to 73 frigates, not the 20 the Navy plans to buy. We also need to see, how do we plan to deploy these small ships in the first island chain, in Indo-PACOM, in coordination with INF non-compliant missiles. That's intermediate range missiles that we can now field with small teams of Marines throughout the first island chain, because President Trump made the right decision to get out of the INF. So we can get creative, but we need a plan that we can implement very quickly. And you are right to argue that we do not have that plan right now.
Now, Congressman Gallagher, you just used a term which was also a sore spot with my editors yesterday. I used the term, all of these resources, the F-35As, the F-35Bs, the Virginia-class submarine, the Coast Guard cutters, they can all be deployed to the first island chain. They said nobody knows what that is, and they took it out. They said the Pacific region. I know what the first island chain is. Don't you think America ought to know what the first island chain is?
Yeah, I don't know why your editors have such a low opinion of your readers, Hugh. I think certainly that's, if you think about what are the strong points of the world today, that's sort of a term we used in the Cold War, George Kennan used to define the areas that really matter, the very centers of industrial production, the areas you have to prioritize. Well, the strong points today are mostly in the first island chain in general, and in areas like Taiwan and Japan in particular. And those are where we're going to have to increase our resources and make sure that we are deterring the PLA Navy and the Chinese Communist Party more broadly by denial right now. Because look at what's going on the border with India. That's just another piece of evidence to suggest to you that the Chinese Communist Party does not feel deterred right now, and they're doing everything possible to get away with changing facts on the ground. And when it comes to the first island chain or the South China Sea, they're actually just creating ground and then planting dangerous facts like military equipment on that ground.
No, you just anticipated where I was going. 20 soldiers of India were killed yesterday by Chinese Communist, the People's Liberation Army of China. And so what would America do if a next door neighbor, if Mexico killed 20 American soldiers? What would we do if anybody killed 20 American soldiers? We saw what we did when the Shia militia of Iraq killed 2 contractors. We killed Soleimani. What do you expect India to do?
Well, we would certainly defend ourselves and strike back. I suspect that we have not heard the last from India on this subject. One thing that clouds it is that while the Indian press isn't shut down by their government, the Chinese obviously maintain a stranglehold on their press. So right now we don't know how many Chinese soldiers were killed in this crisis. Obviously, we've had long-standing tensions between China and India over this contested territory. Recently, what most people are missing is the Chinese have started building physical infrastructure, such as bunkers, roads, and barracks on this disputed ground. And in a lot of ways, it's similar to what we're seeing in the South China Sea, except now tensions have boiled over into violence, and we have 20 Indian soldiers who have died. So I think we have to stand with India on this one. I think the CCP thinks it can get away with changing facts on the ground and enforcing them through violence. And left unchecked, I will predict to you this will not be the last such incident. Instead, we should be both deterring further CCP aggression and expanding our partnership with India by standing with New Delhi in this time of crisis. So we should include, considering sanctions on Chinese military leaders, put that on the table, make it clear to the Chinese side more pain will be coming if they don't cease their reckless actions.
But I'm trying to put myself in Prime Minister Modi's shoes. And it seems to me that if he's a nationalist, his party expects him to be bellicose and to be adamant about the, quote, line of actual control, which is the disputed border between China and India. We got to slow down for the Steelers fans here. And I don't imagine him not doing anything. And I don't imagine the PRC not doing anything back. Admiral Stavridis has an article in Bloomberg today saying the shooting has just begun. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. I think there could be real risks of escalation. It's too early to tell. What's interesting is the press reports yesterday seemed to suggest that no shots were fired, and instead they were sort of beating each other with fists, stones, and rods. And two groups of soldiers may have stepped on a slope and fell down a deep ravine. But again, it's a very murky picture right now, and so I do expect that the Indian public will demand action from Prime Minister Modi. And obviously, since he came to power in 2012, 2013, has taken a very, very aggressive track on all things, not just military confrontation, but in terms of his economic strategy and, of course, the ideological warfare that he's waging against the West. And what we often forget when we see his diplomats acting very aggressively and ham-handedly in many cases, these wolf warrior diplomats, it's easy for us to dismiss it and say, well, this is obviously an overreach. It's going to turn a lot of people off. But we forget that there is actually a receptive audience domestically to this type of policy. There's a lot of people in China that like the idea that Xi and his cronies are aggressively standing up to foreign countries and aggressively reasserting what they view to be their rightful place as the hegemon in Asia, and indeed the hegemon globally.
Is Germany in the 30s an apt analogy to China in the 20s of this millennium?
It's possible. I mean, I always hesitate to make those comparisons. I mean, part of the reason is you always just get crushed by anyone, when you make those comparisons. But I think certainly that's the period of time that instructs us most right now. And I'll always remember there's a moment when Albert Einstein is taking his first visit to the United States of America, and he writes about it. And at that period of time, I believe in 1932, and he says something that's always stuck with me, which is that the part of passive spectator is unworthy of this country, the United States, and bound in the end to lead to disaster all around. And similarly, in the current moment, if we remain passive spectators while countries like China assert themselves and threaten our allies and our partners and our friends, I think we are going to see global disaster that will make the coronavirus look like small potatoes in comparison.
You don't have to call people Nazis. You can call people expansionists without calling them Nazis. You can go back to the French Empire under Bonaparte as well. People become aggressive on their margins, whether it's the South China Sea or the India border or in cyberspace. And when they become aggressive on their margins, that pattern doesn't change. Let me go to a very small bit of my op-ed, Mike, because people don't understand it. I also finally got pushback on Coast Guard cutters. What do you mean? Those aren't part of the Pacific effort. And I corrected them quite definitively that I was told Coast Guard cutters are deployed abroad. What's your understanding?
They have been. There is a debate among our Navy friends, the Nerd Squad, as to whether they should be and whether it sort of inherently saps from the Navy's primary role in Indo-PACOM. There's also a broader debate about whether the Army should be deploying unique combat teams to Indo-PACOM, because this is primarily a Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force fight. But you're right on the facts. And certainly we need more Coast Guard cutters, not just for Indo-PACOM, but for a variety of areas around the world. And certainly we're seeing new regions of the world that we've ignored for a long time, like the Arctic, become increasingly important because the Chinese are trying to dominate that space. And so we don't have the luxury of ignoring certain regions of the world. We can prioritize Indo-PACOM, but we have to keep our eye on the ball elsewhere as well. And it's going to require the Coast Guard to step up. But primarily, this is going to be a sea power fight, which is why, to take it back to your original point, we need an integrated naval force structure assessment. We need a plan to rapidly get to 355 ships at a minimum within the next 10 years, and we don't have that right now.
And we need a phase 4 that includes, I believe the number is $42 billion that the White House, the West Wing wants. Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure. Rep Gallagher on Twitter, at Rep Gallagher on Twitter. Follow me as well, America, to ReliefFactor.com. I took it in the first hour. I'm reminding you now, don't leave home without it. Some of you listen only to 1 hour on your way to work. You've turned it on. You're in the kitchen. You're getting ready. You're having that last cup of coffee. Don't forget to go into the cupboard and get your ReliefFactor.com. Support for the temporary relief of minor aches and pains. I also want to remind everyone, especially new listeners at new affiliates, honorboundcoffee.com. All right, so I've got my United States Senate mug here, probably given to me by... Well, I won't say who. I won't tell you who gives me mugs. But I always sip my coffee from my Senate mug, and I always use honorboundcoffee.com. Why? Because if you subscribe to honorboundcoffee.com, every sip of coffee that you take, the profit from that cup of coffee will go to support military families. Honorbound Coffee, they're started by the same people who run ReliefFactor.com. Pete and Seth Talbot, an amazing father-son team. They've had such success with so many of their different products, including ReliefFactor.com, that they said, let's start a subscription coffee service. But this time, all the profits from that, every nickel, will go to support military families. Please get in the fight and do just that with HonorboundCoffee.com. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by the Heritage Foundation.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Heard somebody the other day say, Drew Brees made a gutsy statement in favor of the flag, the American flag. Really? And I said to myself, well, that's Drew Brees. He's always been a class act. And he doesn't agree with this kneeling, and said so. Now, why that is some sort of great act of courage says a whole lot about where we are in our society. And then something else happened. You know what that something else is? He apologized. I should have known more. I didn't realize. Have a much greater understanding now. What is going on? This is the opposite of the racism that the people seem to think exists in this country. Zero tolerance. I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or our country. Let me just tell you what I see or what I feel when the national anthem is played and when I look at the flag of the United States. End of quote. That's how I feel. I'm supposed to apologize for that? Did he make demands that his teammates not kneel? No. Did he call out any of his teammates for kneeling by name? No. I disagree with it, and therefore I've got to apologize?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com. A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors.
I'm on.
And I know,
I hear
and
you.
myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege because
great.
for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more
Somebody had that problem
done.
yesterday.
There's
too.
no doubt
I
that
don't
our
know
cities
why,
and communities
but
need
I'm
restoration,
glad you found me.
including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I want to remind everyone to go to HughForHeritage.com and get your executive summary of the National Coronavirus Recovery Commission's final report. I'm joined now by John Malcolm. John is the vice president at the Heritage Foundation for the Institute for Constitutional Government. He's director of the Me Center, named for my old boss at the Department of Justice years ago, and the senior legal fellow. Good morning, John. How are you?
Doing fine, Hugh. Good to be with you.
I played earlier today Senator Hawley's impassioned denunciation of the betrayal of religious conservatives. I think it's premature. My admonition to the audience is wait until Our Lady of Guadalupe is decided and then talk to me. What do you think, John?
Well, look, it was certainly disappointing. Justice Gorsuch claims to be a textualist. I think he believed he was doing textualism. I just think he did bad textualism. But you're right. There's Our Lady of Guadalupe, and there's another important religious liberty case still to be decided that may answer some of the questions that Justice Gorsuch clearly said were going to still be open, such as whether there are religious liberty exemptions, et cetera. So we'll learn more by the end of the term. I'm still cautiously optimistic that at least in those cases, Justice Gorsuch will come out on the right side.
You see, I believe there's a category called freedom and federalism conservatives, and we stand vigilant on First Amendment freedoms, especially free exercise and speech, on Second Amendment freedoms, on Fifth Amendment freedoms regarding property rights, and on federalism, especially structural federalism. It's my red zone, and I do not view a statutory interpretation decision, no matter how controversial, to be in the red zone. I just don't, because 25 states already outlaw LGBTQ discrimination. There was a textualist argument, which I have read, and I'm not persuaded, but it's not without merit. It's not whole cloth. And so, I think we have to make our priorities and watch those towers, and we don't know yet.
So I agree with that completely, actually. So this was not a constitutional ruling. It was a matter of statutory interpretation. And for people who are saying, oh, well, this proves that the conservative legal movement is a farce and we can't get anywhere, I would remind people that Justice Scalia, of course, joined an opinion that said that flag burning was protected by the First Amendment. And he wrote what was quite possibly, from a religious liberty perspective, the worst opinion out there, which was Employment Division versus Smith. And I don't think that anybody would say that Justice Scalia was somehow a turncoat and a failure. And so I'm not going to be so quick to condemn Justice Gorsuch either.
That's what, and I believe that Sean Trendy and others have argued that Chief Justice Roberts issued a strategic vote here so that he could assign the opinion to Justice Gorsuch as senior member of the court. What do you make of that speculation, John?
I'm a little skeptical of that because I believe that even if Chief Justice Roberts had been among the dissenters, that in all likelihood, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have assigned the opinion to Justice Gorsuch. He's clearly the vote that the liberal justices wanted to keep. And if they didn't assign it to him, or if they wrote concurring opinions that strayed too far from his opinion, there was always the risk that he could say, I've changed my mind. I'm going to join the dissenters and turn that dissent into a majority opinion. So it could be. I'm not inside the court's chambers. But I think that even if the chief had been with the dissenters, it's highly likely Justice Gorsuch would have been assigned that opinion anyway.
All right, interesting. Now, there's also a theory that is in my mind that Justice Kennedy established this jurisprudence on sexual orientation for which, along with his free speech jurisprudence, he will be most remembered, and his federalism, which was pretty rigorous. This is of a piece with Obergefell, even though it's a statutory decision. Do you think there might be some lingering sense of sort of a loyalty to that line of cases that's played out here in Bostock?
Well, it certainly didn't play out with Justice Kavanaugh, who also clerked for Justice Kennedy. I don't think there's any question that Justice Gorsuch has, proudly by his lights, a libertarian streak. Nonetheless, justices are not supposed to bring their politics into their statutory interpretation. So I don't think that he was somehow giving a nod to Justice Kennedy, but I suppose it's possible.
He made this argument at oral argument, and I thought at that point that was just for the benefit of the cameras, or actually for the benefit of the litigants in doing what justices did. But he apparently does believe that sex means sexual orientation, and that to be dismissed on one day after you've appeared with your same-sex partner is inevitably a sex question. Did you pause at least on that argument, John Malcolm?
Yeah, look, I paused. So essentially what he's sitting there and saying, well, a guy shows up at a funeral home wearing a dress. If it had been a woman wearing a dress, no one would have said anything. Therefore, this must be on account of sex. But two arguments override that for me, which is one, back in 1964, that there was nobody who thought that sex included gender identity or sexual orientation. As well, sex, I believe, pretty clearly means biological sex, and women were treated the same as men. If you were a transgendered woman or a gay woman, you're treated the same as gay men and transgender.
Quick question, men. John. Title IX is about women in sports. It's about really getting women into sports. Do you believe this is going to have to inevitably impact Title IX, even when it's intended to impact biological women?
The words are the same. It may very well.
You broke up on me there, John.
It's in there to have a fix. I do believe they do that in Title. I do believe they do that for Title IX.
Interesting. That will be controversial beyond anything anyone imagines. I'll explain why in the next hour on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you, John Malcolm.
Good to be with you.
America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Exclusive from General Flynn. This is at westernjournal.com. Freedom is oxygen, like the air we breathe that keeps our lungs full and our hearts beating. The celestial feeling of freedom brings a sense of peace to our souls. Freedom must never be taken for granted. Securing our freedom demands a high price. And that price requires hard work and sacrifice. Both will bind us all by the value they produce, but only if we are willing to seek new opportunities and new ideas. Those who have sacrificed the most, those who have given the last true measure of devotion that derives from the love of faith, family, and the cause of freedom, for all of us to be free and for the betterment of our republic and the free world, cannot be allowed to have died in vain. Theirs is the ultimate sacrifice, and heaven is their reward. Our future, the future of our children and grandchildren, and the future of our country are at stake. God will not give way to the care of the devil or allow us to be left to the evil vices of those who would steal our freedom in the dark of night. He will not. Instead, God will stand with us as he always does. Hard work and personal sacrifice still very much matter. Being a good person and showing kindness to others still matter. Is that General Mike Flynn, my friend? Or is it Pastor Flynn? Wow.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Hey, folks, welcome back. I'm talking to Charlie Kirk. Charlie, one of the most disturbing things I've seen recently is some of these activists who are clearly bullies. I mean, there's a violence. You can feel it, that they're very angry and they're approaching strangers on the street and demanding that these strangers take a knee or that the cops take a knee. And I just think I've never seen anything so ugly that cops are being yelled at to take a knee. I mean, they should say, well, I'll take a knee if you take a knee for Jesus Christ. You go first.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point, and I'm going to use it, which is, these are people that won't kneel for God, but they'll kneel because of some sort of pre-described class guilt. And so this is a really important point, Eric, which is this whole idea of white privilege is a racist and sinister lie that is taught to our kids from a very, very young age. And I find the whole idea morally reprehensible, that your identity, your skin color. That's not even your identity, by the way. That's just your appearance. Let's just make that very clear. That identity actually can mean a lot more. It could be your thoughts, your feelings, your worldview. And actually what has made the West so different, which was an idea that Jesus talked about, and people don't recognize this, is that equality under the law was nowhere to be seen. I mean, the Roman Republic paled in comparison to the Christian ethic. When Christ said, no, you're all equal under the eyes of God. We just forget and we just throw that all out in our society. That's why Trump holding up that Bible was so significant.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Here's the former vice president asserting that the sitting president is going to attempt to steal the election on November 3rd. This is what he said.
It's my greatest concern, my single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election. This is the guy who said that all mail-in ballots are fraudulent, direct voting by mail, while he sits behind the desk in the Oval Office and writes his mail-in ballot to vote in the primary.
That's his biggest fear, is that Donald Trump will steal the election. So here we go again with, it was Russia, right? Russia interfered with the election in 2016. Russia got Trump elected, according to the narrative that resulted in an investigation, which led to a complete rebuke of that dubious claim. But it looks like they're going to go back to it again. They're going to go back to election fraud.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
What is the current state of allowance for church attendance?
You know, it's remarkable in different areas of the country. You have certain states who are abiding by the Constitution and deciding on a neutral basis if we're letting people to congregate, whether they're secular or religious, will do it in an even-handed fashion. But there are several states, like Nevada, that have chosen to treat churches and religious organizations worse. So you can go to a casino with hundreds or thousands of your best friends, but you can't go to church with 50 other people.
How do they answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, basically there's a couple problems. So people are familiar with these executive orders all over the country. They start by deciding on an ad hoc basis what's essential and what's not essential. And rather than putting church and spiritual things and worship in the essential category, they put it in the non-essential category. And so then they justify it by it's not a necessity for people. And I think that's something the government shouldn't be doing.
So in effect, at least in California, I would imagine, churches are on a par with nail salons.
Sometimes nail salons are treated better than churches, and that's another thing that's remarkable. If you look at the way they categorize different types of uses, it seems like churches are always on the bottom end of the list, and so they'll reopen, as people know, they've done in phases. Well, they'll decide that, for example, we've had several cases where they're open bars before they're open churches, or nail salons, or, as I mentioned, casinos, or things like that. And so the way, I'm not sure how they get to the conclusion about what's necessary or not, but they're certainly putting religious worship.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com.
Comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings, everyone listening. It's Hugh Hewitt inside of the Beltway on this June the 17th in the year of the plague 2020. I'm looking at the provisional death counts for the coronavirus disease for the week ending June 6th, 2020. 135 people over the age of 85 died. 103 people between 75 and 84 died. 80 people between 65 and 74 died. 46 people between 55 and 64 died. 24 people between 45 and 54 died. 8 people between 35 and 44 died. 6 people between 25 and 34 died. And nobody died under the age of 24 from COVID. With that introduction, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Molly Rutherford, who is with Bluegrass Family Wellness. You find her on the web at UnbridledMD. That's at BridledMD on Twitter. And she's part of flattenthefear.com, a project that one of the show's sponsors, Job Creators Network. Good morning, Doctor. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
What do those numbers, the provisional death counts I gave you from CDC, tell you as a doctor?
They confirm what we already know, which is that there's a certain segment of the population, particularly elderly people, who are vulnerable to this, more vulnerable to getting severely ill or dying from this virus. For example, we know that 0.6% of the U.S. population lives in long-term care or nursing homes, but 42% of the deaths are from that population. So it's just confirming what we already know, which is this virus is not, it's probably not very dangerous for younger people who are healthy, but it can be very life-threatening for the elderly.
Now, I want to tease out the implications of that, Doctor, but would you first give us some background on your medical cred and where you went to med school and how long you've been with Bluegrass?
Sure. So I went to Eastern Virginia Medical School, and before I went to medical school, I worked at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. I actually worked down the hall from Dr. Fauci and wrote some of his comments that he gave to the Hill and so forth. So I worked there for about 6 years before I went to medical school. And while I was there, I got a degree, a master's in public health in epidemiology from Johns Hopkins University. So prior to going to medical school, I had that background. And then I decided to become a family physician. And then I moved out to Kentucky in 2006 after residency and in 2015 opened Bluegrass Family Wellness, which is my own direct primary care practice. I'm also board certified in addiction medicine because when I moved out here was in the middle of the very beginning, or right in the heart of the opioid epidemic. So I went on and became specialized in that as well.
Tell me about flattenthefear.com, the project of jobcreatorsnetwork.com. How did you become connected with flattenthefear.com?
Some of my colleagues from medical organizations had reached out to me because they knew that I like to do advocacy work and I have the public health background. This was regarding some other topics, and then so that's how I got connected to them. And then I guess some of the people that I've worked with, Elaine Parker from Job Creators Network, had been looking at my social media posts and saw that I was more logical and that I had been following the COVID epidemic, and that I was outspoken about what we needed to do and how the lockdowns were affecting people in a negative way. And so they reached out to me and asked me to become a part of the project. And it's opinions of frontline doctors who are actually out in the field treating patients and seeing what's happening in our communities with these lockdowns.
So, Dr. Rutherford, I'm not a doctor and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn. I'm a lawyer, which is almost the antithesis of a doctor. And I also never took stats and can't do regression analysis, but I have intuition. This morning's Telegraph, I believe the leading newspaper in Great Britain, has a headline exclusive. private schools set to ignore government and open in September, quote, come what may. Now, to me, intuitively, all of America's schools should be reopening, whereas maybe not all of America's teachers should be coming back to the classroom. We really cannot inflict another year or semester of distance learning on America's students who are not prepared for it. It is damaging, and they are not at risk. What do you think of my intuition?
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think that schools must open in the fall. And I don't even know that I'm not certain that teachers who are older or at risk need to stay home. I think they can practice some social distancing, take some precautions. The virus we're learning more and more about how the virus is transmitted. And we know that people who get the virus have spent significant time with someone who was infected, and usually someone who has symptoms. And there's some encouraging data coming out of Denmark and some other countries showing that kids are not even really the vector for this virus that we thought they were. So I think it's reasonable to allow teachers to possibly teach from home virtually, maybe on a screen, although I don't know how that would work. But some of the recommendations that have come out from the CDC are frightening for me as a parent. I have 2 kids in public schools right now.
Well, you see, I don't think people are understanding that nutrition is a vector for schools for a lot of the underclass in America. Moreover, it's the only place where some children of chaotic environments, and you mentioned that you're a substance abuse doctor, you know what it means for children to be in a home with a substance abuser. They've got to get to school. To take them out of school is actually to take the life raft away from them, or am I being just too emotional about that?
No, you're exactly right. And I actually have more insight into that just because I'm married to a police officer. My husband's a homicide detective in Louisville. And that's one of the reasons I'm so outspoken. I know this to be true. I know my kids are lucky. They have access to technology. They have a stable home life. And so many kids, especially in Kentucky, we know we're number 1 for child abuse in the country. Just school is their outlet, is their safe place. You know, and also socialization is very important for kids. Learning how to react with interact with other people in society. It's a huge part of their learning, just being around other people, being around other kids.
So yesterday we hear the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans have got some cases of COVID. And the alarm bells sound that the NFL can't come back. I think that's like saying they've got cases at that age for physically fit people. I don't think that's a cancer diagnosis. I don't think that's an alarming diagnosis. How do you view such a diagnosis like that?
No, I agree with you. In fact, I've only had one patient who had the virus, and this person happens to be in her 30s, and she was otherwise healthy. The only reason she got tested was she works in healthcare, and she had kind of a mild sore throat. And she was actually shocked that her test came back positive. She ran the same day she got the test, and she ended up being mostly asymptomatic from it. And I think that's going to be the case for most people under the age of probably 55, 45, definitely under 25. We know that the flu is much more dangerous for people in that age group.
So in terms of setting public policy going forward, and there are a lot of senators and governors who listen to this show, what's your advice to them, doctor? And I also want to go to people who are in substance abuse and in recovery, since that is a specialty of yours. Are we not risking their recovery by keeping them out of AA and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I've had many patients with cravings. I've had a few patients relapse. Thankfully, no one has died of an overdose, but I do know that those numbers are up. Overdose overdoses are up. Shootings have increased about 150% in Louisville since this lockdown. That's a correlation. You know, I can't say that was a cause, but these are things that I know just based on what I do in my practice, and then also what my husband does. So absolutely, we are the consequences. I think we've reached a tipping point over a month ago where the consequences of these draconian government measures are going to be much worse than what most people will experience from this virus.
The benefits. Yeah, Dr. Molly Rutherford can be followed on Twitter at UnbridledMD, capital M, capital D at the at, UnbridledMD, and flattenthefear.com is vital for an intuitive but balanced understanding of the disease and the risks that it has or doesn't have. Please get smart. Thank you, JobCreatorsNetwork.com, for flattenthefear.com. Come right back, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Is it of importance to us in interpreting the events of the last 2+ weeks that we are seeing all of this happen predominantly in hardcore Democrat-run cities, Gianna?
You know what's interesting about that is that Democrats won't even take credit for the fact that a lot of their policies have caused this to happen. You think about somebody like Joe Biden, who goes into George Floyd funeral with a video message talking about racial reconciliation and healing. Meanwhile, he's a big part of the reason why we have so much division in this country today. You think about the '94 crime bill. If we're going to talk about liberal cities, you can't forget about my hometown of Chicago, where you got a mayor there who provided, or rather asked for, 375 National Guardsmen in the city of Chicago and put them all in the downtown area. Meanwhile, the poor black areas on the south side and west sides are left to fend for themselves. You're talking about minority-owned businesses ruined, which they don't have money to come back. Some of these folks don't even have insurance. And that's across all American spectrums, whether you be white, black, or indifferent. We just lived through COVID. And now you got these liberals whose policies have created a huge mess from a financial tax purpose, a tax basis. And now you're disenfranchising poor people more by way of your policies, even through protests and looting. This is unimaginable. Who would have thought that this is where we would be in 2020? But if anybody is really listening and watching what's going on, this should be the best reason not to vote for liberals in any capacity. That's any office, whether it be president, Senate, House, state Senate, state House, mayor, any office. You shouldn't be voting for Democrats. And that's what I've taken away from this time.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
If you actually care about Black lives, you have an obligation to distance yourself from Black Lives Matter, the organization, the hashtag movement, whatever it is. I want to get that out up front. But Horace, how have you been processing this?
So our group, Project 21, was actually formed in the wake of the Rodney King riots. And several of us, I'm a founding member of the organization, but several of us were watching CNN and hearing this idea that it is the normal and legitimate way that Black Americans express their frustrations with civic life, that they run into the nearest Best Buy and grab as many DVD players as they can. And we knew, I knew this, my associates that I grew up with, and it turns out people from all walks of life knew that this is so far from reality. And we decided to form an organization that would say, we're Black Americans, and we want people to understand that this universal vision or perspective that's being put forward on the mainstream media about who Black Americans are doesn't represent or reflect the reality. And we are going to start having people that will appear on the news, appear in print, appear on the radio waves saying, hey, wait a second, there's a different perspective. When Martin Luther King said that people would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, we were astonished to hear that what people were saying is okay to say.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm actually upbeat. After I saw the sales figures yesterday, month over month, 18% rise, I became upbeat about the American economy. I'm actually upbeat about the election of Donald Trump. I do not believe we're going to give this country to Joe Biden and the hard left Democratic Party that stands behind him. Joe Biden is a front for a party that is radical, that is identified with defund the police, with the Seattle occupation, with an incoherence which is systemic. The Democratic Party is systemically incoherent. That's what's systemic about the Democratic Party. It's systemically incoherent. And Joe Biden has not done a press conference for 3 months. Do you know why? Do you have a suspicion as to why? Because he's a figurehead. He hasn't lost a step. He's lost a lap. And it's obvious, and he cannot answer questions. And this becomes a problem when it comes to governance. I'd encourage you to read about the hitting on all cylinders West Wing of the Trump White House right now. It's my new Washington Post column. It's over at the front of WashingtonPost.com. But I'd also encourage you to read about the economy as reported in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. And I really would encourage you to just start thinking about, what do these markets mean? We're back to where we were before COVID. The science is being read into the markets. They understand the recovery is going to be a V-shaped recovery. This upsets Democrats. They don't want a V-shaped recovery. They understand that the American people know that this is a wholly irrelevant to the economy flu, meaning our economy was strong and is still strong. The flu interrupted it. The coronavirus interrupted it. And the coronavirus is not anybody in this country's fault. The CDC did have some enormous failings. The FDA had some enormous failings. But Trump is the guy to lead the recovery. That is the point of my column this morning. And what should be in that recovery includes defense spending. Go and read it. Let me check markets overnight and yesterday, brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. I remind you, just had a friend buy a house. I believe it was more than $400,000 and 20% down, 3.15%, 30-year money. I remind people I bought my first house with a fetching Mrs. Hewitt in 1985, and we paid 13%. Can you believe that? 13%. Because that's what it was to buy a house after Jimmy Carter. That's what it'll be to buy a house after Joe Biden. And I believe, by the way, inflation is coming, and you're nuts not to buy your real estate now at 3% money. And you're nuts not to get your child or your grandchild into a home to help them by being a co-borrowing, non-occupying borrower. So that means you're just signing your name on your credits at risk, but that's okay. You're fine. You're stable. If that's you, AndrewandTodd.com. Or call them at 888-888-1172. And if you're a senior, who saw their 401k go up and down and you're worried? Get some money out of your house with a reverse mortgage. Never make another mortgage payment. Improve your life. Life is good. Don't make it hard on yourself by sitting on a bunch of equity and not using it. That's nuts. AndrewandTodd.com. You can trust them. I've known them for years. Andrew and I were in a Bible study together for a long time. I'm on the East Coast now. He's on the West Coast. I talk to him every other week or so. Call them at 888-888-1172. Yesterday, the Dow was up 526 points. The NASDAQ was up 169 points. The S&P was up 58 points. Overseas, what started out as a slow day, England is now up over 0.5%. Germany is up 0.7%. The 10-year Treasury, that is the baseline bill, it's up to 0.76%. Oil remains at around $38, back from its ridiculous lows, meaning that they're looking forward to a decent year. The recovery is here. It's happening. And I went out last night for dinner with my friend Schroeder, who was visiting from California. And in Northern Virginia, the fear is over. Everyone's eating outside. It won't be long before people are inside. Even the rather slow governor of Virginia is going to figure it out that it's safe. The CDC numbers cannot be denied. Flattenthefear.com cannot be denied. But if you're going to buy a house now. AndrewandTodd.com. Come right back, America. More ahead on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by the Job Creators Network Foundation.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
I want to share with you Raynard Jackson's comments because this came from the White House, where the president is sort of, in his way, on a listening tour. You know, I know that the rap against Donald Trump is that he doesn't listen to anybody. And that, of course, is a lot of hogwash. He does listen. He ultimately makes decisions based on his gut, on his instincts, on what got him to the White House in the first place. But quite frankly, anybody who's been around him recognizes he does spend a lot of time listening to advisors, listening to people who are willing to bend his ear. So here's Raynard Jackson.
Well, what I'd like to say to you, Mr. President, is kind of off the beaten path. I'd like to say to all the media assembled here that I wish they would quit lying about what you've done specifically for the black community. So you got radical liberal journalists like Joy Reid from MSNBC, Don Lemon from CNN, Roland Martin, who are putting more poison into the black community than any drug dealer, who are killing more black folks than any white person with a sheet over their face. How are they doing it? Spreading these lies about the economy you had, Mr. President, before the virus was a continuation of Obama. That's just factually not true. I have a degree in accounting. I keep up with the economy. They're lying. So to all these folks on MSNBC, CNN, Roland Martin, what, you're afraid to have real black Republicans who know what the hell they're talking about? If you want to know the truth, if you want us to dissect the Obama economy, let's do it. And I think, Mr. President, your record will win the debate. Thank you.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This is the state of play. And what is the response from the left? Mr. Mayor, please listen to Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State, where some of the worst violence is occurring, on his responsibility or lack thereof to the people of his state.
Thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely? Regarding the National Guard.
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that from any credible source. Not that you're not credible. It's just like before I espouse an opinion, I should know of which I speak.
Should a governor be laughing about losing control of the streets of one of his cities, Mr. Mayor?
I'm not surprised, Sebastian. Are you?
I'm not, but what does this mean for the people living in Seattle in Washington State?
Well, I mean, I hope that the American people can observe all this and they can see there's no coincidence that the worst riots, the most destruction, the most loss of human life and property occurred in cities and states governed by Democrats. It didn't happen in cities governed by Republicans. And riots didn't happen in my city until it got a Democratic mayor again. The last riot was under a Democratic mayor. I avoided them for 8 years, and Bloomberg did it for 12. And it's not hard to do it if you activate the police to get them to stop it. These people, I don't know what has happened to them. They almost seem like anarchists rather than members of a responsible political party.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com. A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated.
Welcome back, America. Part of the plan is to reform the police where the police needs reforming. Donald Trump signed an executive order yesterday, which you may not heard much about because it does just that. And it does so with balance in mind, with great concern for the families of excessive force, the victims who we know their names so well, and with a regard for the law enforcement community, 99.9% of whom are wonderful Americans who answer the bell every day and protect you and me from criminals. And so the president struck that balance. I want you to hear it. Cut number 7, Donald Trump in the signing ceremony for the executive order. Cut number 7.
And thank you all for being here as we take historic action to deliver a future of safety and security for Americans of every race, religion, color, and creed. We're joined today by law enforcement professionals and community leaders. Though we may all come from different places and different backgrounds, we're united by our desire to ensure peace and dignity and equality for all Americans. I've just concluded a meeting with incredible families, just incredible families that have been through so much. The families of Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, Antoine Rose, Jamel Roberson, Adiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Darius Tarver, Cameron Lamb, and Everett Palmer. These are incredible people, incredible people. And it's so sad. Many of these families lost their loved ones in deadly interactions with police. To all of the hurting families, I want you to know that all Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain. We are one nation, we grieve together, and we heal together. I can never imagine your pain or the depth of your anguish, but I can promise to fight for justice for all of our people.
On to say, cut number 9, we can act as a national family.
Americans can achieve anything when we work together as one national family. To go forward, we must seek cooperation, not confrontation. We must build upon our heritage, not tear it down. And we must cherish the principles of America's founding as we strive to deliver safe, beautiful, elegant justice.
In fact, the police are partners with communities in this process. Cut number 10.
Every day, police officers make great sacrifices to keep our communities secure and safe. In 2018, our police arrested nearly 12,000 people for murder, 25,000 people for rape, and nearly 1.5 million for assault. Very dangerous criminals. In many cases, local law enforcement is underfunded, understaffed, and undersupported. 47% of all murders in Chicago and 68% of all murders in Baltimore went without arrests last year. Americans want law and order. They demand law and order. They may not say it. They may not be talking about it, but that's what they want. Some of them don't even know that's what they want, but that's what they want. And they understand that when you remove the police, you hurt those who have the least the most. Nobody needs a strong, trustworthy police force more than those who live in distressed areas, and nobody is more opposed to the small number of bad police officers, and you have them. They're very tiny. I use the word tiny. It's a very small percentage, but you have them. But nobody wants to get rid of them more than the overwhelming number of really good and great police officers. Some of them are standing with me and with me in the audience today, and I appreciate you being here.
I want him I want you to hear as well what he had to say about his executive order are serious reforms for police. And he spoke about the fact that President Obama and Vice President Biden did not sign such an order. Cut number 11.
Of them put in our police departments and working with our police. We will have reform without undermining our many great and extremely talented law enforcement officers. President Obama and Vice President Biden never even tried to fix this during their 8-year period. The reason they didn't try is because they had no idea how to do it. And it is a complex situation. Beyond the steps we are taking today, I am committed to working with Congress on additional measures. Congress has started already, and they'll be having bills coming out of the Senate and possibly out of the House. And hopefully they'll all get together and they'll come up with a solution that goes even beyond what we're signing today. But this is a big, big step.
He wrapped up this way. Cut number 12.
Well, listen.
Americans know the truth. Without police, there is chaos. Without law, there is anarchy. And without safety, there is catastrophe. We need leaders at every level of government who have the moral clarity to state these obvious facts. Americans believe we must support the brave men and women in blue who police our streets and keep us safe. Americans also believe we must improve accountability, increase transparency, and invest more resources in police training, recruiting, and community engagement. Reducing crime and raising standards are not opposite goals. They are not mutually exclusive. They work together. They all work together. That is why today I'm signing an executive order encouraging police departments nationwide to adopt the highest professional standards to serve their communities.
Now, the president signed the order, and immediately left-wing media attacked it, except for the people who know what they're talking about. Van Jones, I always respect Van because he always speaks the truth about from his perspective. I don't agree with him always, but he always tells you from his perspective as a criminal justice reform advocate what has happened. He was a big advocate for the First Step Act, which Trump signed and which Jared Kushner pushed through the Congress. Van Jones was on CNN with John King yesterday. He commented on the president's executive order, cut number 13.
Well, listen, I think there are two things here. One is the speech and one is the executive order. The executive order is a good thing, and mainly because you saw the support of law enforcement there. That gives you a sense of where the bottom is, where the floor is for reform. And that floor is higher than it has been. There is movement in the direction of a database for bad cops. We've never had a federal database for bad cops. That's why these cops go all over the place doing bad stuff. The idea that you're going to have de-escalators now alongside cops so you can talk people down and not shoot people down. The chokehold, that's common ground now between Pelosi and Trump. So you see good stuff there.
He was very complimentary. In fact, he went on to speak about the president's interactions with the families of the victims of excessive force, cut number 14.
Well, there were a number of families there who spoke directly with the president, with Barr, Attorney General Barr, and also with Tim Scott. And all those law enforcement people were there listening, and they basically just told their stories, which apparently, according to the people I talked to, there were tears. And, I think the president was kind and gracious to them. I think Tim Scott in particular was moved by what was being said behind the scenes. I think it was good that that did not turn into a big photo op. That did not turn into kind of a big media moment. That was more of the process of trying to move this White House forward. And I think those families feel good about having had the chance to tell their stories to the people who have a chance to make a difference.
So I don't know if you heard any of that other than on the Hugh Hewitt show. I don't know if you heard that at all yesterday. You have to go looking for it or you have to listen to Hugh Hewitt. Now, I'm on YouTube, and I'll put this segment up today. I'm on Instagram, and you can follow the show every day. If you don't have a radio station near you that's carrying me or you're not in your car, you can listen on one of the radio apps. But you really can't watch cable news. Cable news doesn't cover the news. Cable news is trying to get Democrats elected. Nancy Pelosi was on with Nicole Wallace yesterday. I want you to contrast what Nancy Pelosi said with what you just heard from criminal justice reform leftist Van Jones. Here's Nancy Pelosi on with Nicole Wallace, cut number 4.
I would say one of the reasons probably the president put that out there today at the same time as he was photo opping, the chairman of the Fed was testifying before Congress, and he was talking about the facts of what's happening, that in this last quarter was the biggest dip in the GDP in history. Right. The biggest dip in the GDP. He talked about how unemployment was increasing for people of color, the reason that there was some apparent improvement in the numbers in the May report was because of unemployment insurance and direct payments, which were injecting demand into the economy. We need more of that.
So Van Jones, who lives his life around criminal justice reform, praises the president, and Nancy Pelosi calls it a photo op on MSNBC. Who are you going to believe? Because I think at this point, the Democrats, we know what they stand for. They are run by AOC and the squad. They stand for defund the police. They stand for Seattle. They are radical. They are hard left, and they're honest about it. Now, the dinosaurs of the party, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumer, they're not honest about it. They don't want to be known as the socialists that their parties have become. They don't want to be known as the anti-police extremists that their parties have been captured by. That's their attempt to hang on to power. Elliot Engel's going to lose next week, down by double digits. Steve Kornacki, he's a longtime Democrat dinosaur. The Democrat dinosaurs are scared that AOC is a meteor strike, and their party has gone so far to the left. They really do believe in defunding the police. They really do believe it. And if you're voting for a Democrat, you are voting for the destruction of civil order in the United States, because that wing of the party is in control. Seattle is just fine by them. Maybe we'll come back with the bluest skies. Now we got Tom Holland coming up. So it's the resident historian of the Hugh Hewitt Show is coming up, so that won't work. Hey, what will work is ReliefFactor.com. Third time of the day, I remind you, I do it once an hour. Don't forget to leave home. You're getting back. You're starting to commute again. Some of you folks in Seattle are going to work. You're not going downtown, that's for sure, but you're going to work. Go get your ReliefFactor.com. It's made in Washington State, by the way. My friends Pete and Seth Talbot are headquartered up there. And they make a great product. I carry curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 4 natural supplements. Don't stop taking whatever your doctor prescribes, but supplement that. And if you're not taking anything good on you, don't take over-the-counters. Try ReliefFactor.com. I carry curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. And please don't forget as well, HonorBoundCoffee.com, because every sip of coffee you take, once you subscribe to HonorBound Coffee and get your coffee sent home, every sip of coffee will support military families. Coming back with the historian in residence at the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tom Holland. Stay tuned.
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
My guest is Jason Riley. He is the board member of the Wall Street Journal, also senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Jason, what do you think are the remaining barriers for people to escape poverty, Black people?
The remaining barriers are largely government-created barriers, denying kids the ability to choose the schools they want to attend, or at least their parents choosing the schools that they want their children to attend. When Black aspiring entrepreneurs want to start a business in a neighborhood, there are plenty of barriers there. So I think they're largely government barriers. I mean, you mentioned the title of one of my books, Please Stop Helping Us. I don't think there's a government solution out there that's going to save Black America. I think it's mostly about Black America or about government getting out of the way, minimum wage laws that price Blacks out of work and so forth. You know all these arguments, but that's not how the other side measures barriers. They look at disparate outcomes, racially disparate outcomes, and wherever they see them, they assume something nefarious is going on. I read an article in the LA Times recently talking about police. 900 killings in LA by police since 2000, and then they tell you 80% were Black. They tell you the percentage of the Black population in LA, and they go, draw your own conclusions. When we know, it's not that simple. Just telling us what the percentage of the population is, and then the percentage of Blacks involved in with police. What we want to know, what are the crime rates based on neighborhoods and zip codes and race and ethnicity and so forth. You must factor that in.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Attention business owners. As America gets back to work, will customers know you're there? With little warning, the coronavirus attacked our nation and our well-being in ways we never anticipated. The tragic loss of life, unprecedented economic upheaval, and a shattered sense of security has left many individuals and businesses in shambles. While the aftershocks could be felt for months to come, they may not have to. There is hope for an extraordinary turnaround of your bottom line. But will you be prepared for America's grand reopening? All signs point to the biggest business opportunity of our lifetime, coming as early as this summer. A recent survey of local advertisers shows a 10-point jump in the number of local advertisers who plan to maintain or increase their spending. 1 in 4 businesses expect to spend more in advertising by the end of June, and more than half expect to reach advertisers across the country. Will your message be seen and heard? Will your business benefit deliver the right advertising message to reach all potential customers wherever they are? Your business can be ready for a post-COVID-19 economy, but the time to act is now. Be at the front of the line as our economy begins to fire on all cylinders once again. For a free assessment of your marketing message and strategy, visit salemsurround.com or contact your local media strategist today.
Hello. Hello.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I have made it my project to introduce America to Tom Holland, who is now the historian in residence of the Hugh Hewitt Show, whether he wants to be or not. Tom lives in England. He is the man who's gotten me through the quarantine, because before it began, my friend Steve Thames took me aside at the last dinner party we hosted and said, "You've got to read this book, Dominion, by this English fellow, Tom Holland." And I listened to it when the shutdown occurred. And then I listened to Dynasty, which was about the Caesars. Then I listened to Rubicon, which was about the Roman Republic. Then I listened to In the Shadow of the Sword, which was about the rise of Islam. And now I'm listening to Persian Fire. I'm like on a Tom Holland addiction. He joins me now from England. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, and all the better for hearing that I've given you an addiction.
Well, it's your readers, by the way, of these books are terrific. Do you select them personally?
My readers? Yes, I do. I have nothing but the best readers.
But I mean the people who narrate the books, who actually make them into
Oh, I see
audiobooks.
what you mean. Oh no, I don't actually choose them. And to be honest, what I'd really like to do is actually read them myself. So I've you know that I share the name with the Spider-Man actor. And
Yes.
that's kind of boosted my desire to take to the boards myself and become an actor. So,
Well,
I quite fancy reading one of them myself.
you're going to have a tough time. Now, I read them all out of order. And I always ask, I have a thing about thrillers. So Daniel Silva and C.J. Box and others come on once a year. And I always say, read their books in order. Yours don't really have to be read in order. And Dominion is the latest. But if someone wanted to do it chronologically, would they not begin with Persian Fire, then move to Rubicon, then move to Dynasty, then move to In the Shadow of the Sword, and then move to Dominion?
Yes, I think they probably would, because Persian Fire begins in about 600 BC, so that's a long time ago. And then Rubicon, it tells the story of Julius Caesar, which is about 600 years later. So yes, I think that would be the wisest way to do it.
Now, Tom Holland, explain to people where you come from. I mean, popular historians like Barbara Tuchman in the United States, and I described you yesterday as the Ron Chernow of Great Britain, to a friend who said, "Why are you on this Holland kick?" What is your background?
My background was that I wanted to be a great novelist. So that was my ambition. So when I left university, I set myself becoming a great novelist. And the awful truth was that I discovered that I was never going to be a great novelist. And I began to realize that actually what gripped me, what moved me, what excited me, what thrilled me was actually the very ancient past, because that's what I'd been fascinated by as a child. And they always say, write about what you know. And often people will go back into their past, into their childhood, into their youth to get their inspiration. And in a sense, that's what I was doing. So the first book I wrote, Rubicon, was about the fall of the Roman Republic. And that was because that was the period that had always most gripped me as a child. I mean, I think it's the most extraordinary, thrilling, remarkable story possibly in the whole of history. It's got not just Julius Caesar, but Cicero and Pompey and Cleopatra and all these kind of names that still resonate to this day. And I suddenly discovered when I sat down to write that book, I felt a kind of great surge of excitement, the kind that I'd never found when I was writing fiction. And I realized this is what I actually want to do. And the thing that gave it a particular kind of potency for me was the fact that even though I was writing about something that happened 2,000 years ago, the backdrop to when I began it was 9/11 and the build up to the Iraq War, which of course was, it was the story of an imperial republic going into the Middle East. And basically that's what's happening in Rome in the first century BC. And so there was also that sense that even though this is very, very ancient history, stuff that happened thousands of years ago, it does. You know, Barbara Tuchman wrote this great book, A Distant Mirror.
Yes.
But there are other periods as well as the 14th century that hold up distant mirrors, and the images and the reflections, they may be distorted, they may be strange, they may be eerie, but they are kind of reflections as well. And so from that point on, really, I guess that's where I'm coming from. I'm interested in what might seem very distant periods to people, but I think that they are not without relevance for the present. And
Oh,
I
my
think you can
goodness.
see that even now.
Oh my goodness, they give so much perspective. And what I think your gift, I don't want to make you blush, but I think your gift is to use the vernacular of today with a scholarly seriousness to make them very approachable and not dusty. They're the opposite of dusty. They're engrossing. These characters in Persian Fire. You know, I've always known about the Spartans, and I've read the 300 by my friend Stephen Pressfield, Gates of Fire. I know the big stories. I know the great gods. I know Troy, but I haven't got it organized chronologically. And what you've set out, maybe in a Gibbon-esque sort of way, is for a 2020 reader to go back, and if they will embrace and listen to these 6 books, they'll actually know how we ended up, me in my studio and you in yours. They will have an idea how the West got here. I don't know if you set out to do that, but you've done it.
Well, as I think I've mentioned before, my interest was always the classical world. So I talked about Julius Caesar, but yeah, the Spartans at Thermopylae, the Athenians at Marathon, all those I mean, they're just great, great, gripping stories. And so that's what I wanted to turn to, and I wanted to share some of the excitement and the thrills that I'd always got from it with other people. So that was absolutely my ambition. But the process of writing both about the Romans and particularly the Spartans, who are completely terrifying people,
aren't they? Wow.
Yeah, really terrifying, was absolutely to make me think that actually the thing that often is most fascinating about these ancient peoples is not that they're like us, but that they are nothing like us at all. And so that's why I ended up writing Dominion, which is a history of Christianity, and argues that essentially what makes us different from the Romans and the Spartans is Christianity, that we've been Christianized in all kinds of ways that we might not recognize. And then with that is what it has been really the kind of the great discovery for me of writing over the past 20 years about antiquity is not just how like us they are, but how very different they are as well. I think it's like science fiction. So great science fiction, the fascination of it is precisely that it's that what is familiar about these future worlds is what makes it unsettling, and what makes it unsettling is what can make it familiar. And I think that the same is true of the distant past for us today. It's the similarities and the differences that play off one another that make them so remarkable.
Now, last week I had on Professor N.T. Wright, whom you know, and N.T. Wright gave a shout out to you as being a very serious historian, and by that he means careful in his selection and arrangement of facts. And he has an entire chapter devoted in his new book, History and Eschatology, as to the variety of ways by which we define history. So I am curious how you select and organize your facts. What's the Tom Holland work approach?
Well, I think it helps that most of the periods I've written about, you just don't have the range of sources and incidents that we tend to have in more recent periods. So often, you know, you're reading Persian Fire at the moment, which is a story about the Persian Wars, the Persian invasion of Greece. We have, relatively speaking, we have quite a lot of information about the Greeks. So we know what the Athenians were doing, we know what the Spartans were doing to a degree. Though even there, the sources are often, by content, the standards of the Second World War or something like that are incredibly scanty. But what we don't have at all is any record by the Persians. We have nothing from any Persian describing this invasion whatsoever. And so I wanted to see these wars, these invasions, from the Persian perspective as well. And so, that being so, you have to draw on all kinds of things that might not immediately seem relevant to the story of the wars to try and elucidate how the Persians saw the world. So some of the things that I found myself becoming fascinated because I thought that they showed, they offered a kind of a glimpse into how the Persians saw the world was their attitude, say, to gardening, to trees, to wild animals, they wore platform heels. All these kind of details, which in themselves are completely fascinating, are all the more so because they give us a kind of insight into the way that the Persians saw the world. And then you doesn't just become a load of baddies coming out of the east and attacking the goodies. Actually, you come to realize that both, as is often the case in war, both sides think that they're in the right, and that's what makes the clash between them, in a way, so fascinating. It's not just a military clash; it's a clash of cultures, of civilizations, of ideas, of ways of understanding the world.
There's also to be found in the interplay of Persian fire and in the shadow of the sword, an introduction for a Westerner like me to Zoroaster. Now, there is actually a Zoroastrian shrine north of Northwestern University where my daughter attended. I would drive by it and I said, what the heck is Zoroaster about? And you explain it. Now, I know what Manichaeanism is because I've studied Augustine and I know the Confessions, but I didn't know about Mani. You put it all in. Is it your intention to make this? It's not comprehensive. No one can be comprehensive, but to make sure that anyone who finishes your book is at least a well-read individual on how we got here?
I want to share things that I find fascinating with other people in the hope that they will find it fascinating too. So you're absolutely right, Fix, on the figure of Zoroaster, who is probably the first great prophet.
Yes.
Whether he actually lived or not, we can't be sure. But what is absolutely clear is that when the Persians attack Greece, for instance, they do it with the understanding that the world is divided into rival spheres of good and evil. And in subsequent generations, this comes to be associated with the name of Zoroaster. And this idea that the world, there are twin dimensions of light and darkness, of the truth and the lie, is hugely influential because it's not something that people in any way took for granted before that. So when the Persians attacked Greece, the Greeks worship a god like Apollo. The whole point of Apollo is that he tricks you. The oracles that he gives you in his shrine at Delphi, even if they're telling the truth, have the semblance of lies. And you think of Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, and of course the patron goddess of Odysseus, the great trickster hero. She's perfectly capable of doing disguises and lies as well. And to the Persians, that would have been incomprehensible because the lie is something completely wrong. Truth is something absolute. And in a sense, this is an understanding that then has come to us because the Jewish exiles were in Babylon. They allowed to go back to Jerusalem by the Persian kings when they conquer Babylon. And it seems pretty clear, I think, that these Persian ideas of good and evil, of light and darkness, have a huge influence on the Jews, and thereby through the Jews on Christianity and on Islam as well. So,
and I wanted to say, in listening to Persian, in the shadow of the sword, no, Persian fire, I get him confused. Darius, who I've been mispronouncing his name for 64 years, Darius, who is in the Old Testament, is a familiar figure only because of a relation to Cyrus, who is a very familiar figure because of Nehemiah and the Old Testament. You're putting them into the story in a way that the West really doesn't understand, Tom Holland. I know that in the shadow of the sword might have been controversial. I don't know if Persian fire was controversial, but you're actually introducing the West to pre-Western foundations of the West.
Well, this is what I thought was so fascinating, because again, I wrote Persian Fire in the aftermath of the Iraq War, and in the Iraq, in the build-up to Iraq War, there was a lot of discussion about America and Britain and the West generally as being the heirs of Greece and the values of democracy and liberty. And actually, what I think is fascinating is that the West, America, Britain, all of us, are at least as much the heirs of Persia as we are of democratic Athens, for the reasons that I was just explaining, because those Persian ideals the idea that there is good and evil, that is exactly what Bush was talking about when he said that there is an axis of evil. This is language that does not echo Pericles or Socrates or anyone like that. It echoes the language of Cyrus and Darius, the kings of Persia, the kings of Iran. And so that's absolutely an example of the kind of wonderful matrix of paradoxes and ambivalences and unexpected echoes that studying ancient history and using it as a mirror held up to the present day invariably brings. And that is what I think is so fascinating about it.
A couple
of Persia as much as we are of Athens.
This morning, I was discussing on the radio show decisions handed down on Monday by the Supreme Court, and there will be more important decisions tomorrow. On the Supreme Court, there are Lycurgus and Solon in relief. They are part of the law-giving mosaic that adorns the back of the court. And their names familiar, I would think, to most people who at least go to law school, but they don't really know anything about Lycurgus. They don't know anything about Solon. And you make them come alive. And they're not really uncontroversial characters, at least Solon isn't. I mean, not in any kind of Christian framework, but they're necessary again. And you've done a fine service in bringing them to this era. Now, Tom Holland, what I want to ask you before I ask you the big question about China, Millennium and your Kings of England series, you know that the Last Kingdom is big in the United States right now. It's based on Bernard Cornwell novels. It's done quite well, but it would lead me to believe that only Alfred matters, and the other ones, they all kind of die off, and then we'll get to 1066 and all that. Why are you fixated on those kings? Why did you jump around a little bit?
Oh, because I'm English, and so I'm interested in how it is that the country I live in, England, came to exist. And I think there's a kind of vague assumption that England and Scotland have always existed. They've always been separate. Not at all. England, a bit like the United Kingdom of Great Britain, England is a united kingdom of various fragments of earlier kingdoms. And so the story of how this kingdom of England emerges is a completely remarkable story. And the contrast is with your country. The United States, you know who the founding fathers are. You study the history of it. It's the great foundational moment for your country. We, in England, we tend not to know this at all. People might vaguely know about King Alfred as someone who fought the Vikings and burnt cakes, but that's about it.
Yes.
But we know, but most people here do not know about Alfred's son Edward, who conquered half of what would become England. They don't know about his son Athelstan, who becomes the first king of England. And they certainly don't know who I think is one of the most remarkable figures in English history, the founding mother of England, a woman called Athelflaed, who was the daughter of Alfred, the sister of Edward, the aunt of Athelstan. And she is a great warrior who recaptured a large number of cities from the Vikings. She was a great administrator. She was a great patron of peace. She was a great patron of the economy. She founded large numbers of cities that still stand across England, a completely remarkable figure. And yet most people in England know nothing about her. But she is our equivalent of George Washington, and she should be better known. So that's why I write about her.
She's known in the United States because of the Last Kingdom series on Netflix, but not. I'm glad to see you're getting her due. Now, here's my last big question for the week, Tom Holland. Throughout all of these books, and currently pressing on the West, is this vast Middle Kingdom, which is not part of our legacy at all. Persia, you have proven to me, is not as much perhaps as Greece, but it is part of the story. Islam is very much a part of the story of how we got here in the West to where we are today and how it's all mixed up. But that vast Middle Kingdom that Dr. Kissinger has attempted to chart in on China, is that caught your eye yet? Are you aware of it? Do you care about it? Will it become part of your canon?
Well, I don't speak Chinese, so I feel that it's beyond my ken, really. But of course, it is always there. And actually, even in the reign of Augustus, the first Roman emperor, the poet Horace talks about Augustus sitting in his house on the Palatine, worrying about the Seres, and the Seres are the Chinese. And so you have that sense that right, 2,000 years ago, people in the West, the most powerful man in the Western world, Caesar Augustus, was worrying about the Chinese. And I think that for everyone, certainly in Europe and now, of course, in America as well, China is the kind of the great counterfactual. It's the other great empire, the opposite of Eurasia. And so in the US at the moment, there's lots of talk about decline and fall. Is America doomed to fall? And the reason that we ask that is because we live in the shadow of Rome. You have a Senate, you have a Capitol, and so you have this sense, oh my God, all empires are doomed to fall. But actually, if you look at China, you see that's not the case at all. China has there've been many dynasties. The territorial integrity of the empire has collapsed, has fragmented. It's been conquered by barbarians. It's fallen to pieces. The empire itself has been replaced by a communist regime, and yet recognizably, contemporary China, the People's Republic of China, is descended from that foundational kingdom of China that existed back in the time of Augustus, in a way that modern Europe is not the heir of the Roman Empire. And so
Dr. Kissinger likes it.
Trump is not the heir of Caesar Augustus, whereas Xi Jinping is clearly, in a sense, the heir of the state that the first emperor of China founded. And I think that offers a fascinating contrast to our assumptions in the West.
The Yellow Emperor. Dr. Kissinger says their theory has always been that which is divided must unify and that which is unified must divide. And it's been going on for a lot longer than the West has understood things to write down. They've been writing things down a lot longer. So where does Tom Holland go next? You have finished Dominion. Dominion is selling very well. I think people are aware of Tom Holland. You are like Ron Chernow. You're breaking out all over the place. Where do you go next?
You make me sound like the coronavirus.
Every author should hope so. Yes.
Well, it'd be nice to go viral, I suppose, in that sense. I've just finished I'm sure in the US you had I Claudius. I know it was a big influence on The Sopranos and things like that. And I Claudius was written by Robert Graves, who also translated Suetonius, the scabrous Roman biographer of the lives of the Caesars, for Penguin Classics, and that came out about 50 years ago, so a long time. So I've just finished a new translation of Suetonius, and I'm in the middle of doing the introduction to that, and have enjoyed that hugely. So that's been my lockdown activity, is translating the lives of Caligula and Nero and Domitian, which has fortunately managed to keep me busy.
Well, that's high academia. I am curious, most Americans of my generation, I'm 64, we know Alistair Cook. Is it Tom Holland's ambition to do that, to take your works and to go into the new platforms that are available and make them available to people who will not read or listen?
Yes, I'd love to do that. And in a sense, the sheer range of ways of talking about this stuff is kind of overwhelming. So at the moment, I'm concentrating on the translation, but I will dip in quite a lot into Twitter, which I find a kind of a very distracting source. And because I've done quite a lot of radio here in England, I'm interested in looking at the idea of podcasts, but that's something to come when I finish the Suetonius. There's new media, and then there's very, very ancient media. And at the moment, I'm on the ancient media.
Well, good luck in bridging them all. I find you to have been my companion through the last 3 months, and I hope there's much, much more. Tom Holland, thank you for joining me again. We will check back in with you periodically and find out what you think about events going on, because it's always anchored in events that have gone before, and I appreciate your generosity of time.
I appreciate your generosity in having me. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Tom. It's wonderful as always. Great stuff. It'll be up on YouTube. We'll play part 2 tomorrow, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Dwayne. Yep.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks ever so much.